The best place to hide the truth is in the pages of a book.
Maybe we should just read. Maybe we should just read.
Welcome to Hayes Reviews. Good evening. This is Nick, creator of Hayes Reviews, and we are live broadcasting, streaming once again after a whole month off. I've been on holiday, traveling around with my family, enjoying the hot weather here in the UK. We don't get very much of it, so when we do get it, we have to make the most of it. And I took a break from streaming. My schedule was pretty intense, doing 3 streams a week. We got to the end of the last book, and I thought, holidays coming up, take a bit of time off and regather the energies. And tonight we are back at it with our part 1 in our series reading the new book, the book that the members of my Telegram group community picked. We actually had 3 books to pick from, and we've already done the first one, and the book that came in second is the one that we're going to be reading tonight. We're not going to read the whole book tonight, of course. It's about 300 pages long, so it will take us a few sessions of live streaming to get through it, but I'm very excited for it nevertheless. So, welcome if you're watching live, and if you're watching on the replay, equally good to have you here. Do not forget that if you are watching on the replay and you want to go straight to the meat of the book and the reading of the text itself, there'll be a pinned comment underneath the video, and you can go and find that timestamp and accelerate ahead and not have to listen to my introductory ramblings, but there might be some nuggets in the introductory ramblings as well. But I will leave it up to you. And as always, if you're watching live, you don't have much of a choice. You got to go through this in real time with me, but I'm super grateful for anyone who is here tuning in live. We've got a little crowd over on YouTube. Not sure about Odyssey and Rumble, I can't quite see, but some familiar faces in the YouTube chat: Frank, Johnny, LJ, RK, and we also had Richard Grove in here earlier on as well. And so I'm deeply happy to be back broadcasting, and I'm very happy to see you all back again. I've missed you. I've missed doing this, and actually I've had such a break from doing it that it's made me a little bit nervous to be back here doing it again tonight. So I hope this goes smoothly. I did have a bit of a tech hiccup at the beginning trying to figure out the settings for Rumble, but I think I got it up and running on Rumble. So we are streaming to YouTube, we're streaming to Odyssey, and we're streaming to Rumble. Those are the 3 places you can check out the video. YouTube tends to be a little more of a, more censorship, more fudging of the numbers, more algorithmic manipulations of your mind and your worldview and the information that you get to consume. So if you can and you are willing and you are able, I would suggest considering moving on over to Rumble or Odyssey. Those platforms tend to be a little more supportive of free speech. But of course, YouTube works, it's smooth, it's familiar, it's comfortable, and we'll keep using it as long as we can. But yeah, they're the 3 platforms that we are going out to tonight. So, great to have you here. It's been a wonderful time off, but I'm very, very excited about tonight's reading. So let's get right on with the show. Few tabs and things to get out of the way up front before we get into the book. So let's just dive right into that and see how it goes. All right. So as always, if at any point you feel moved to support the show in any way whatsoever, you can find all the ways to do that at allmylinks.com/Hayes Reviews. You can find places to watch me stream live. You can also find places to connect with me on social media. We have Instagram, Telegram, we even have Twitter. Yes, I have Twitter now. I don't use it very much, but you can add me on there, and that's where I'll announce live streams, You can send crypto if you are so inclined to do that. You can send super chats via Streamlabs or Entropy. You can support monthly on Patreon or Subscribestar. You can send a one-off donation by PayPal and buy me a coffee. I would appreciate it very much if people can do that. But of course, what's important is being here and sharing the information and learning and educating yourself to get a better understanding of the world and how it works, because I think we can all agree and we're all aware that we're living through fairly crazy times. And certainly I was blissfully unaware of that fact back right up until 2020. And then it all kicked off. The revolution, the big C event of 2020 happened, and I was left reeling going, what the heck is going on around here? I'm going to have to learn. I'm going to have to get some answers to these many, many questions that I am asking. And that eventually led to the creation of this channel. Well, first it led to this, massive collection of books that are behind me that you can see over my shoulder. And there's piles around the room that are off camera as well. So that was step one. And then step two was, do you know what? There's no good me having these books and just keeping all this information to myself. Let's put it out there. I'm sure there are some other curious people wanting to know how things got to the way they are, right? So we're going on this learning journey together. The books that I read on this channel, I've never read before. I'm reading them for the first time. I'm not an academic. I'm not a sort of analyst. I don't do this professionally. This is kind of something I love to do and I enjoy doing, and I'm very grateful for people who come along the journey with me. So we're just basically, reacting to the books, reading them, finding out what we can learn. And in many cases, the topics of the books that I've collected are things that are not well known, not mainstream knowledge, not the kind of information you get in your 15,000 hours of schooling, for example. These are the kind of topics that you have to dig around to find them. And increasingly, it's getting harder and harder to find these topics. And that's why, from my point of view, buying the books, preserving them, having a hard copy to hand that you can annotate, that you can refer to, that you can share to other people, and you can read it to other people. And that's what I'm doing here. So that's a bit of an introduction to the channel. If you're new here, welcome. There are quite a lot of videos that we've already done and got through. I'll show you where they are now. So the best place if you want to catch up on the previous work that we've done is if you go to my YouTube, and you can go to the playlists tab here. And here you can see all the books that we've read through so far. I think today is book 8 or 9 maybe. This might be the 9th book we've done. But we've done a book on the Rothschilds from 1914. We've done a Bertrand Russell book. Lusitania by Colin Simpson was fantastic, very eye-opening, and quite tragic as well, very powerful. The story of the Rockefeller Foundation from the president of the Rockefeller Foundation, Raymond Fosdick. That book was also very eye-opening, quite written in the 50s, I think, but quite revealing in terms of what that foundation admits to funding and who it admits to funding. Quite incredible. And I don't think they would admit to that funding so readily these days. But this is what I mean. This is what's so good about going into these books. You find out a lot of information, a lot of historical knowledge and tidbits, which are very good to know, because you can impress other people and you can help other people learn by knowing them, right? We did the Fabian Freeway. That was the longest book that we've read on the channel. That was 14 videos, and that was all about Fabian socialism, how it started here at the end of the 19th century here in England, and how it spread out to America, and how it is still spreading with the ultimate goal of an international sort of communistic socialist system of top-down technocratic government. As we probably all know on this channel, they made big strides with it, advancing that agenda since 2020. Fabian Freeway gives you a very solid slice of well-documented, well-referenced history as to how that happened and who it began with and who were the players that were involved. So I enjoyed that one very much, incredibly illuminating to read that one. Then most recently, we did The Next Million Years by Charles Galton Darwin. That's a 1953 book. That book gives you an insight into the mindset and the worldview of the sort of scientific technocratic elite who are running this grand theft world, as Richard Grove likes to call it, the name of his podcast and his project and his many years of research and learning. It is a grand theft world. It is a global system that is being constructed and has been constructed for many decades now. And so today we are continuing with The Fearful Master by G. Edward Griffin. And this is going to give us a look into one of these organizations that are supranational. They are above and beyond and outside of the nation state. And they incorporate nation states, in fact. And I thought this would be a good one to have because G. Edward Griffin. He's a great kind of researcher, writer. He makes interviews, documentaries. He writes books, and he's been at it for quite a long time. I believe he's in his 80s or 90s now, but he's still sharp. He's still putting on events, the Red Pill Expo over in America. He's still putting out interviews, and what a fantastic guy. And he wrote other famous books such as The Creature from Jekyll Island. He also wrote a book about cancer and its link with the vitamin B12. So kind of an OG in this space of revealing occulted information and trying to get it out to people to help people, because this sort of knowledge gap, this information that is hidden from us for a reason. It's to keep us dumbed down and dependent on the systems which aren't there to serve us and make our lives better. And it's to prevent us from getting out, from decoupling ourselves and building better alternative parallel systems which actually serve our interests and our needs and our wants in a way that is peaceful, that is ethical. There is a massive amount of effort and energy and focus put into preventing us from doing that. Okay. And so reading some books and learning about those systems and finding out about their history is very important. And I thought this book that we're going to be looking at tonight will give us a very critical and important key piece of the puzzle, because it is all about the United Nations. So as I often do with these videos, we'll start with Wikipedia, because it's always good to find out what we are supposed to think about something. That's what I view Wikipedia as. It's kind of the approved information that is there, publicly available, and this is what you should think and what you need. This is what you need to know according to the scientific, technocratic people in charge of this place. This is what they think you need to know. But of course, Wikipedia is a famously unreliable source. It gets edited all the time, and it can be it's not a good, you shouldn't believe everything on there, but it's always a very good starting point. And so I'm going to start my video tonight with having a little scan over the Wikipedia article for the United Nations. So what does it say? Well, what is the United Nations? In case you haven't heard of it, by some strange, I don't know, maybe you've just been very focused on reading books, and as we'll find out, the United Nations, there's not that many books written about the United Nations. But yeah, maybe you haven't been watching the news, maybe you haven't been watching the films and the propaganda that's put out on behalf of this organization. Maybe you've been doing something more productive with your life and you aren't aware of the United Nations. Well, good for you. I'm glad you're spending your time so wisely on more important things. But alas, the United Nations is something that we do need to know about, because as we're going to find out, it's growing every year, getting more powerful, getting more influence. And is that a good thing? Right? We kind of just led to believe that it's a benevolent organization. It is there to provide. Well, let's read it. We'll see what we're supposed to believe about it. The United Nations is a diplomatic and political international organization with the intended purpose of maintaining international peace and security, to develop friendly relations among nations, to achieve international cooperation, and serve as a center for concerting the behavior of member nations. So, peace and security, who wouldn't want that, right? Who would not want peace and security? You can't argue against peace and security, can you, really? Unless you're a psychopath. So on the face of it, sounds like a good organization with benevolent intentions. It's widely recognized as the world's largest international organization. So that is very important. You ought to know it. We ought to know about it, right? And the history of it and what it's up to. Now, one of the words that stood out to me in that initial opening sentence there is this word, concert. I don't even know how to say it. Concerting. I know a concert, you go to a music concert, you watch a performance, and that's a lot of fun. And you can go and enjoy the concert with your loved ones, maybe of an evening, go and watch the concert. This is taking that word and using it as a verb. And so in that case, I don't know if you say concerting or concerting, right? I'm an English teacher, and I am very unfamiliar with the use of this word in a verb form. And so it got my attention, and I thought, all right, concerting, interesting. New word, always happy to learn a new word. What does it mean? So I went over to Cambridge Dictionary Online. No results for concerting. That's interesting. I went to dictionary.com. No results found for concerting. Curiouser and curiouser. finally, I went to Etymology Online and I found this entry. So concert, verb, from the 1690s, to contrive or adjust. From 1707, to contrive and arrange mutually, to bring into agreement, to contend with zealously, contest, dispute, debate, and to contend and strive. So quite an interesting word for them to use in the Wikipedia article, considering it's not in use and there's no modern usage of it. And actually, the use of this word goes back to the 1700s when you're looking at it and using it as a verb. So, kind of interesting, right? And, taking this to contrive and adjust, to contrive and arrange mutually, if we bear that in mind and go back to the Wikipedia article, that's what they're doing to member nations. So they're adjusting the member nations. They are, getting my tab navigation messed up here. They are contriving nations and adjusting nations and arranging nations mutually. And I think importantly, they are bringing nations into agreement. So into agreement on what, you might ask. And I think that would be a very prudent and sensible question to ask indeed. All right. So that's what the United Nations does. It is concerting the behavior of member nations. Quite a strange turn of phrase, I think, to say that you are concerting the behavior of somebody, of anybody. What does that sound like? Concerting, to bring into agreement the behavior of countries. That sounds like controlling the behavior of countries. That sounds like unifying and standardizing the behavior of member nations. And, it's not the behavior of the nations, is it? It's the behavior of the people in the nations, because what is a nation without people? So what they're really talking about here is the behavior of the human beings who live in the member nations of the United Nations. So, very curious. That really stood out to me, and I thought it was worth mentioning. A little bit on the history of the United Nations. It was established after World War II with the aim of preventing future world wars. It succeeded the League of Nations, which itself was characterized as ineffective. So what I thought was quite funny about this is, the League of Nations was ineffective, so let's do it again. Let's do it again, only this time more. And that's a fascinating area of history with the establishment of the League of Nations and why that failed, and then the second attempt in the form of the United Nations. And I think, as you'll see here, it's kind of being it's looking to be a little bit more successful than the League of Nations was. So the objectives, as outlined by the Charter, include maintaining international peace and security, protecting human rights, delivering humanitarian aid, and promoting sustainable development, and upholding international law. At its founding, the UN had 51 member states, and as of 2024, it has 193 sovereign states, which is close to the majority of the world's recognized sovereign states. So they're pretty much there. They've pretty much got everybody. Okay? And so I thought, off the back of this, I thought, do you know what? Let's check how many sovereign states there are in the world. And I'm going to show you the answer to that question in a minute, because that was pretty interesting. But continuing with the Wikipedia article, by the 1970s, the UN's budget for economic and social development programs vastly exceeded its spending on peacekeeping. So it tells you up front that it's interested in international peace and security, but actually its budget for economic and social development is way, way, way bigger than the spending on peacekeeping. So that's kind of a contradiction that needs explaining, I would say. What is this money? What is this social development that they're pouring money into? And they're pouring a lot more into it than peacekeeping, or at least they were by the 1970s. And the UN system includes a multitude of specialized agencies, funds, and programs, including the World Bank Group, the World Health Organization, the World Food Program, UNESCO, and UNICEF. Additionally, non-governmental organizations may be granted consultative status with the Economic and Social Council and other agencies. So that's basically as far as I got. There's a lot more history here. We will probably eke more of that out as we go on with this video series and the reading of the book. But that's just a very quick and dirty introduction to the United Nations. And a couple of these I've highlighted in green because I've been on these Wikipedia pages before in previous videos, scrutinizing the World Health Organization, talking about the World Bank Group, looking up the origins and the purpose of UNESCO. The important thing to know is that these are all above and beyond the democracies that you're told you live in, and they are all above and beyond the voting that you engage in as a member of that democracy, if you like to put X's in boxes and take part in that ritual. These organizations are unaccountable. You can't vote your way out of them. You can't vote your way to influence them. They're beyond that mechanism. So very much worth scrutinizing and understanding and knowing about what they're getting up to. Okay. So yes, concerting. It's concerning that they are concerting. But we all learned a new word, which is always a good thing to do. Okay, this page is criticism of the United Nations. And I was actually surprised at how big this page is on Wikipedia. It's actually pretty revealing. A lot of issues with the United Nations from a variety of places, but we'll just skim through those quickly because I have a feeling in the book we're about to start reading, it's not going to be a all hail the United Nations type of book. I think it's going to be a little more on the critical side of things. But let's skim through this. This is the criticism of the United Nations, which Wikipedia is quite happy with you knowing about. It's been criticized for its policies, ideology, equality of representation, administration, ability to enforce rulings, and ideological bias. So pretty much everything, everything about it. Philosophical and moral criticisms. First one off the list is moral relativism. Right there, the top one listed on the Wikipedia article of reasons that the UN has been criticized is moral relativism. Now, I've spoken about moral relativism many times on the show. I really enjoyed learning about this from people like Jay Dyer, from Mark Passio as well. Moral relativism is an absolute catastrophe. It's a really destabilizing force, and it's not a good long-term solution. If you want civilizational stability, if you want a nice place to raise your children and your grandchildren, moral relativism is an absolute corrosive poison to the fabric of society. So interesting to see it pop up here. And also we get a book reference, which I always love. One book I'd never heard of. So under moral relativism in 2004, former Israeli ambassador to the UN, Dor Gold, published a book called Tower of Babel, and that's B-A-B-B-L-E, Babel, How the United Nations Has Fueled Global Chaos. And this book criticized the organization's moral relativism in the face of genocide and terrorism, which occurred between the moral clarity of its founding period and the present day. So that book is now on my wish list. I may be getting a copy of that at some point. But it has also been criticized for being a threat to national sovereignty. Some critics of the UN have alleged that it threatens national sovereignty and promotes globalism. Well, for an organization that has the world map as its logo, pointing out that it promotes globalism, that's a bit of a well, duh moment. But interesting that they admit to that criticism. And I think when you reflect back on that phrase of concerting the member nations, the behavior of the member nations, concerting, bringing into agreement, bringing into alignment, making uniform all the behavior of all these countries so that they have the same banking systems, the same food systems, the same culture. You know, that I think is going to you've got to get rid of national sovereignty in order to achieve that. So makes sense. And this sounds like a very valid criticism. But we'll move on and breeze through the rest of these. There are debates surrounding population control and abortion. And this is the United Nations Population Fund has been accused by American conservative activists of providing support for government programs that have promoted forced abortions and coercive sterilizations. So they're into the population control. Criticisms of the administrative aspect of UN include the role of elite countries. So that's the 5 permanent members. They have a veto power, which allows them to tell all the other member nations to piss off, basically, if they want to. And then membership of the UN Security Council has been criticized, and also the democratic character of the UN. critics have objected to the idea that the UN is a democratic organization, saying that it represents the interests of the governments of the countries who form it and not necessarily the individuals within those countries. Okay, interesting. The UN Security Council has been accused of corruption as well. And there's been criticisms of the effectiveness of the UN, its inability to prevent conflicts, its handling of the Cold War, and then this section was quite interesting, I thought. It's been criticized for the attention given to the Arab-Israeli conflict. So it says, issues relating to the state of Israel, Palestine, and other aspects of the Arab-Israeli conflict occupy a large amount of debate time, resolutions, and resources at the United Nations. John Kerry, Ban Ki-moon, and other critics such as Dor Gold, Alan Dershowitz, Mark Dreyfus, Robert S. Wistrich, Alan Keyes, and the Anti-Defamation League also consider UN attention on Israel's treatment of Palestinians to be excessive. And there's a bunch of references there for all those names that were just listed. And of course, none of the people who hold the opposite opinion to these people are listed. Right? So I thought that was quite curious and revealing of a bias within the Wikipedia and the article itself. And then further down here as well, the UN has sponsored several peace negotiations between Israel and its neighbors. The latest being the 2002 Roadmap for Peace, the controversial United Nations General Assembly Resolution 3379, which was 1975. This determined that Zionism is a form of racism and racial discrimination. But then it was rescinded in 1991 as one of Israel's conditions for its participation in the Madrid Peace Conference. So another very interesting and curious tidbit that Wikipedia is telling us about there. And the UN has also been the focus of allegations of anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism by Alan Dershowitz, human rights activist Elie Wiesel, Anne Bayevsky, Bayard Rustin, and historian Robert Wistrich, and feminists Phyllis Chesler and Sonia Johnson of tolerating anti-Semitic remarks within its walls. So a long, long list of all the people who criticize the UN for being anti-Semitic and anti-Israel. But not much else on the other side of things. And there's more detail here. I just did a little skim over this recently. But the section on this page that talks about how the UN is mistreating Israel and is full of anti-Semitism is by far the largest when it comes to criticisms. But then there's also a section on the UN admitting Sri Lanka civil war failure. And there's been criticisms of various scandals. A book called Snakes in Suits, which studies psychopathy in the workplace, was mentioned. I've added that to my wish list. And there's also a child sex abuse scandal where reporters witnessed a rapid increase in prostitution in Cambodia, Mozambique, Bosnia, and Kosovo after UN, and in the case of the latter two, NATO peacekeeping forces moved in. So how about that? And there's a whole bunch of extra articles down here based on criticisms of the UN Commission on Human Rights, criticism of the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, criticism of UNICEF, defamation of religion at the UN. So sounds like a pretty controversial organization, just judging by the Wikipedia page, right? Pretty controversial organization, and yet nations are signing up, and 193 of them so far have decided it's a good idea to join. And if we just go back to this CAM, as I mentioned before, I thought, okay, how many countries are there in the world at the minute? Because, these things change and you get taught a certain number, and then at some point, it's like planets in the solar system. It was, one, and then the planet that wasn't a planet now became a planet, so there's a different number, and you got to keep checking these things and stay up to date. So I thought I'd have a look. How many countries in the world? I typed that into Brave, and the answer was there are 193 member states of the United Nations. I was like, that's not the question I asked. How many countries in the world? And Brave. So I thought, okay, fine, Brave, telling me, right, not answering the question I asked. Fine, I'll go somewhere else. I'll check Google. Hey, Google, how many countries in the world? There are 195 countries in the world today. This total comprises 193 countries that are member states of the United Nations. So the second one I asked is telling me about the United Nations as well. So also quite interesting. I also found the Britannica Encyclopedia online. I asked that, how many countries are there in the world? The answer was, the United Nations includes 193 member countries. So that's 3 for 3. Yeah? 3 for 3 answers that I got back when asking how many countries are in the world are just telling me about the United Nations and the number of countries in the United Nations. So apparently the United Nations is the world. And if you're not in the United Nations, then you ain't a country and you're not in the world, according to Google, Brave, and Britannica Online. So quite an interesting result there as well. I think you would agree. And as I was doing a little prep and learning and research and preparation for this video, I came up on this book, which I thought looked very interesting indeed. I thought I would mention it for you out there. I know people who come to this channel tend to be into books, like I am, and it's always good to help each other, build out our libraries and make sure we've got good resources in there. And so this is a book called The United Nations and the Question of Palestine, Rule by Law and the Structure of International Legal Subalternity. And this is quite a recent book, 30th November last year. And another new word for me, subalternity. I hadn't heard of that before. The description of the book is talking about how the UN has failed to respect international law with regard to Palestine and the way it's being treated by the country that the UN hates, according to Wikipedia. Interestingly, this final sentence here says, this book demonstrates that through the actions of the UN, Palestine and its people have been committed to a state of what the author calls international legal subalternity, according to which the promise of justice through international law is repeatedly proffered under a cloak of political legitimacy furnished by the international community, but its realization is interminably withheld. And I thought, wow, that sounds like a great book. I would like to read it. £94.53. So, and that's pretty much the cheapest copy I can find online. So, I might take out a payment plan, and spend £20 a month for 5 months to get hold of this book, but I'm not sure. But I thought I'd put it on your radar and just point out, I know it's a Cambridge textbook, right? And these can tend to be a little bit more expensive, but Cambridge University Press is the publisher. But that's crazy, £100 for that book. So to me, that tells me there's got to be some good stuff in there. You can see on the right some of the books that I've got in my basket. £2 you can get Margaret Cole's book on Beatrice Webb. For 20 quid you can get School World Order by John Krycek. And then for 5 quid you can get Lucifer Rising. So much cheaper, much more reasonable. But if you want to learn about the United Nations and the way it's treated Palestine, you got to pay £100. So how about that? But yeah, if anybody wants to make a donation, I promise I will buy this book and I'll read it to you. Okay, so the other thing I thought I would do in preparation for tonight's stream was I would have a quick look through some of the other books in my library and see which ones talk about the UN, because that's the topic of tonight's book. And I was surprised some books that I thought would have lots of references to the UN didn't. These ones here that I've got up on the screen are the books with the most index page references to the United Nations. So you've got Griffin's other book, one of Griffin's other books, The Creature from Jekyll Island, Claire Ellis, The Blackening of Europe. We've got Bat Yor, 2 books, Eurabia, and also Europe, Globalization and the Coming Universal Caliphate. Then we've got Eoin Ratiu, The Milner-Fabian Conspiracy. We've got Julian Huxley's book, Memories 2. Julian Huxley, of course, was the founder and the first sort of director or president of UNESCO. And then last but not least, we've got Sean Stone's New World Order. Sean Stone, the son of legendary film director Oliver Stone. So these are books that you might want to hunt down copies of these and grab them and read them if you want to learn a little more about the UN off the back of what we learn in The Fearful Master, which we're going to begin reading very soon. I think I've got one more thing. Yes, the other thing I wanted to put on people's radar is this clip. I haven't watched it yet, but it came out, earlier today. UN Replacement Migration, Conspiracy Theory or Fact. This is a Grand Theft World clip from episode 195, half an hour, very relevant and pertinent to what's going on in the UK at the minute. And I know that Richard Grove and Scott Armstrong will have done a fantastic job of looking parsing the facts from the fiction, navigating through the propaganda and the emotive sort of mind control media that we have to navigate this in these times to get to what is actual and factual. So I wanted to tell people about that. The clip here is on Odyssey, Grand Theft World channel, and that would be very relevant and pertinent to what I think we're going to be learning about today and what's going on at the minute in the world. And I think that brings us to the end of the preamble ramble, if I'm not mistaken. Let me just check. Oh no, I got one more thing. Actually, no, we won't do that other thing just yet. So that is it for the introduction. I'm going to have a quick sip and then a review of the chats, and then we're going to get on with tonight's reading. How are you all doing? I hope you're doing well. Excuse me a moment while I take a sip. Cool. So let's have a look in the chat. Total Blackout Painting is here. Hello. Thank you for sharing the stream on X. I very much appreciate it. We've got Hua Mai Vu in the audience watching from the train back home. I hope you have a very relaxing and enjoyable journey, and it goes quickly with me talking in your ear holes. Christine says, good evening, everyone. We've got Julian Ward, first time here. Warm welcome to you, Julian. Johnny Fogg says, music concert now has a very similar meaning to the term TV programming. They tell us every time. Yeah, well said. And I know Johnny's a musician. He's got some great covers. I don't know if he has original music. I'm not sure, but on his YouTube channel, some great covers, acoustic guitar music. So if you like the kind of music that I play at the start of my show, you'll probably like Johnny's music as well. Did a really good cover of Creep by Linkin Park. Put that up recently. That's awesome. I really recommend checking out Johnny's work. And yeah, music concert, definitely music, the way music has been used to shape culture, to influence people, to plant seeds in minds. Like, think about how sticky music lyrics are. You can not hear a song for a decade and then you know every word of it as soon as it comes on the radio and you can sing every word, right? Those words, those phrases written by somebody else go right into your subconscious, into your memory, and stick there. And you didn't choose to put them there. You didn't write them. You didn't design those words. You don't know the intention behind them. As we know, we describe words as something that we spell, and we also cast magic spells. So a lot of these words have double meanings, sometimes triple meanings, and it's very good to be aware of all the different levels of meaning so that you can kind of navigate the world a little bit more effectively and cautiously. I, for one, have become a lot more careful when it comes to music, what I listen to, and I scrutinize the lyrics a lot more. And I try and find if there's, if I'm going around singing songs, what are the words that I'm saying to myself? Even if I'm just singing in the shower on my own, what are the words that I'm saying to myself? Because there are thought patterns that are being reinforced and language patterns that are being reinforced. And those phrases and those words and those ideas are more likely to come out in your day-to-day interactions with people, in the way you think and talk to yourself and about yourself, to yourself, which is very important, the way you talk to yourself internally. So very powerful music, and I'm a lot more cautious these days. Partly because of reading the musical trilogy, Musical Truth books by Mark Devlin, which I have reviewed on this channel. You can check those out on the playlist of book reviews. I don't know if you just heard my dog barking in the background there. It's actually my mum's dog. We're just dog sitting for the week. So yeah, check out Johnny Fogg's work, and it's very good to have you here, my friend. Frank Lennon says, yes, peacekeeping, they did a super job, didn't they? Elizabeth Kendall's here. Good to have you here. And then Frank says, so the world is the UNA, predictive programming with respect to one world government. Yeah, I think this is going to be, this is going to become revealed to us, I think, as we read the book, as we learn more and move forward with this video series, that this idea of one world government, of international government, is very much linked and entwined and was at the root of the formation of both the League of Nations and then the United Nations, which came after it, as we just learned on Wikipedia. Alrighty. Oh yeah, Johnny says the song he covered is Crawling. Sorry, I got the name wrong. What did I say? Creep? Am I thinking of Radiohead? And he does have a few originals dotted around, and there's another original to drop very soon. Awesome, my friend. I'm very happy to hear that you got original music in there as well. Excellent news. Okay, so I'm about ready to get into the book. Haven't got any comments on Odyssey, haven't got anything on Rumble. I kind of messed up the Rumble, so I'm not surprised about that. But yeah, let's get into the book. So, that's not what we want to do. We want to do this. Book cam. So tonight we're reading The Fearful Master by G. Edward Griffin. And I just wanted to take a minute to tell you a little bit about this, the acquisition of this book. So I've got the other G. Edward Griffin book, the infamous one, I should say, Creature from Jekyll Island. And that's quite a hefty one. Very packed, dense with information. And I'd seen G. Edward Griffin being interviewed by Richard Grove, and I knew he set up the Red Pill Expo. So his name was on my radar. I knew he'd done the book about vitamin B12, for example, and cancer. And for some reason, I just typed his name into, I was just looking for books online. I just typed his name in, found out he has this book called The Fearful Master. And I thought, oh, I don't have that. And I would like to learn more about the United Nations. So where can I buy a copy of that? So I went over to Bookfinder and I found that there was a copy on eBay. Now you can find the copies of this book. It's pretty old, not old, but it was first published in 1964. And this is the 8th printing, which is 1972. So, you know, it's a good sort of 50-year-old. So most of the books you find are very tatty. They've been read and handled, and they're sort of slender paperbacks. So they kind of, they can get worn out quite quickly. But I managed to find a pristine, unread, unopened, still sealed copy of the book. And I was like, oh my goodness. And not only did it have the copy of the book, right, but it also had all these other goodies in the packet as well, right? And so I just wanted to, because we'll probably get into some of these as well as we do this reading. If you have a look here, right at the top there, you can see the price. $1. $1 back in the 70s when this was printed. What a bargain. I paid much more than $1 for this bundle, but it was absolutely 100% worth it, and I'll show you why in a minute. So I got the book, but as well as the book, we got a postcard, which has some information about the contents of the book here, and also a picture of the house that Hiss built. We've got the Genocide Treaty by William E. Duren. Just give me a second. I'm going to move my microphone. We have got Communists Control the UN by the same author. And these are articles from magazines, from the New York Times, and this was a speech. Okay, we've got congressional comments on the UN, a booklet there, with newspaper articles reprinted as well. We've got the United Nations Charter, and that'll be a copy of the United Nations Charter. It's very important that we look at the published documents by the look at the words from the horse's mouth. You know, what do they say about themselves? What do they say that they're up to? And compare it with the actual, things that are going on in the world. This one is a copy of Arms Control and Disarmament Act, which pertains to the United States. So that just looks like a straight up photocopy. Amazing. We got Reed Benson and Robert Lee, What's Wrong with the United Nations. That looks like another little informational pamphlet with some pictures in there as well. We've got What is the United Nations up to now? Another informational pamphlet. Something about disarmament. Then we've got American Opinion, an epilogue on China. Which world will it be? A timely warning. Get Us Out by Gary Allen. People might know his name. I've got a book of his on Kissinger and another book of his, which is Non Dare Call It Conspiracy. So a classic conspiracy text. And then last but not least, and this is probably my favorite one, is 46 Angry Men, UNO Violations in Katanga. So this is when 46 civilian doctors of Elizabethville denounced the UNO violations. And this is accusing the UNO, the United Nations, of violating their own charter, of violating the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the Geneva Conventions. 46 Angry Men. And this is a reprint of their statement and their appeal to highlight the horrors that the UN was actually engaged in and presumably tried to cover up. But I don't know, because I don't know the intricacies of this story yet. But all those extras came with this copy of The Fearful Master, and I thought that was pretty cool. So I wanted to mention that. And that whole bundle cost $100, including postage, which I think is a really good deal, because if you just want to get this on its own, you're looking at $30 to $40. Sometimes it's listed on eBay for $70 or $80 even, just for this 46 Angry Men book. Just give me a second. I'll just put you on the waiting screen for one moment. I'll be right back. Bit of a runny nose there, but it's all sorted now. So we got all this supplementary material to dive into as well once we've read the book, or maybe as we read the book we can check out these reference materials. But in terms of like historical documents and things to get on the record and things to learn from, I was pretty happy with that bundle, and very happy that we got a brand new unread copy of the book to get our teeth into today. One other thing as well that I learned about when I got this was how to break in a book, right? So sometimes when you read books, the spine can get cracked and then the whole book sort of falls apart, but you can prevent this by sort of what they call breaking in the book beforehand, where you bend out the pages quite gently and you fan them like this, and you sort of ease up the tension in the spine there, so that when you're reading it, it is less likely to crack and fall apart. With this being quite an old book, I thought it would be good to do that. So I did spend a couple of sessions just fanning out these pages and gently pressing them down like this, just so that we could also get the text on the webcam, so that you can read it as we go along, because it's some of the pages are, I don't know, because it's an old printing, some of the text is quite close to the seam there in the middle, and it can be hard to get it all on camera, but hopefully we'll do all right and we'll get it on the record. And that's about it for my introduction. So The Fearful Master, a second look at the United Nations. Let's get on with it. So we've got a quote on the front cover from the New York Daily News. It says, "This is a hard-hitting, carefully documented book and a healthy antidote to UN can do no wrong propaganda." And then on the back here, we've got a few more quotes. "Students of the UN will value this book for its extensive research. Perhaps the most important book written on the United Nations, an awesome compilation of facts. This book should be read by all Americans and demands their thoughtful and immediate attention." And there's also a bit of information about G. Edward Griffin as well. The author says his wife and 4 children live in California, and he is engaged in research, writing, public relations, and documentary film production. During 1963 and 1964, Mr. Griffin delivered throughout the United States a series of speeches on the United Nations. The Fearful Master is an extension of his thesis on this topic. So, quite an artifact. Very grateful to have a copy of this in my library, and even more grateful that I get to share it with you. So let's dive in. So we've got a quote here. "Government is not reason. It is not eloquence. It is force, like fire. It is a dangerous servant and a fearful master." And that's George Washington. Okay. So it's copyright 1964, but this is the 8th printing, March 1972. So it's pretty good that he so much demand and so many people interested in the book that he had to go back and order 8 more rounds of printing. And I don't even know if there were more than that. But what's very key and interesting about this page, and we'll zoom in and linger on it for a second for anybody out there to take a screen grab, is a list of sources. So it says, direct quotations or reproductions taken from the following sources have been reprinted in this book with written permission of the respective publishers. And I grabbed a bunch of these books, right? So there's, I just want to tell people, more books on the topic there that Ed Griffin is referring to in this book. You might want to take a snapshot of that and then hunt some of those down. I managed to get to Katanga and back. I got Who Killed the Congo. That one's quite pricey, but Philippa Schuler, I've got a biography about her as well, and she sounds like quite an incredible woman, and I'd very much like to talk about her on the channel at some point. But I've got her book and her biography. Then I also managed to get this one, You and the United Nations, which is a children's book, which we will definitely cover on one of my preamble rambles because there's some very interesting stuff in there. And then From the Danube to the Yalu as well by General Mark Clark. I managed to grab that. So some of them are kind of stinky and old, dusty, messed up books. But that's what you would expect for books that are kind of almost 100 years old, right? Okay. Let's see. Probably about there. Introduction. The Fearful Master, concisely written and well documented, sets forth the double standard which guides the UN through its devious and treacherous path toward world domination. The author, Mr. G. Edward Griffin, has performed an outstanding service in giving the people of the free world a picture of what has happened, is happening, and will happen in the very near future if we continue our course of strategic surrender to international forces. The book opens with the story of Katanga and reveals the broken promises which the UN made to Moise Tshombe in order to deceive him and to turn over to the central government the only province of the Congo where law and order had prevailed and where freedom was the watchword of its leaders. The murder, pillaging and rape practiced by the UN forces in Katanga can happen to any country that surrenders to UN control. Author Griffin outlines in considerable detail the communist infiltration into the personnel at every echelon of the UN, and he exposes the treachery and subversion that flourishes there. The author meticulously outlines the grand design for surrender and likens it to a jigsaw puzzle. The chief designer is well aware of the ultimate picture, but an individual working on an indiscernible piece of that puzzle does not know exactly what he is doing or where it will fit into the picture. When all of the pieces are put together, however, the finished grand design will be that of a one-world government, maintained by forces against which resistance by any nation will be futile. The Fearful Master is a book which is long overdue, but I prayerfully hope that it is not yet too late to awaken the American public. This book should be read by all Americans and demands their thoughtful and immediate attention. So I think what's really good, and we are very fortunate to have this book, because we get to see if the predictions came true or not, because it was written 60 years ago. We can compare what Ed Griffin is warning us against and saying will happen. We can compare it with the historical record of the last 60 years, and I would submit that given what we just learned about the number of countries in the world, they're probably making pretty good progress. You know, they're doing all right for themselves. Anyway, we've got a little, what do you call it? A dedication here. To my beloved wife and those 4 precious little ones entrusted to my care, that this book may, in some small way, help to preserve them from the horror of nuclear war or the terror of communist peace. That phrase, the terror of communist peace, really stuck out to me. It's quite an incredible phrase. Okay, foreword. On April the 24th, 1955, the Communist Daily Worker wrote, quote, "The United Nations has become an imposing institution with a fantastic pyramid of agencies and commissions and an agenda each autumn of 75 questions. There it stands, in its striking home of stone and steel and glass on the shores of the East River, to which thousands of people come each week in pilgrimages of peace and hope." This is one of those instances where the truth is sufficiently horrible that the communist propagandists do not have to lie. In the 2 decades since the United Nations was created, it has expanded into a giant international bureaucracy with tentacles reaching into every sphere of human activity from matrimony to garbage collecting. Americans by the millions have indeed made the emotional pilgrimage and genuflected before the UN Shrine of Peace. But, having looked at the United Nations, most of us have not seen. We have seen the building and the flag and the pictures of meetings where delegates listen to each other over earphones, but we have not seen the real United Nations, its purpose, its philosophy, its ultimate goals. To recognize these things, we will have to look much deeper than the glittering phrases about peace and brotherhood or the ringing manifestos on human rights, and let the facts speak for themselves. Wherever possible, quotations used in this book are from original sources. These sources have been thoroughly footnoted in hopes that the skeptic will check them out. Some may feel that there are too many quotes and footnotes, but this book was not meant to be one of those easy-to-read jobs that can be glanced through with one eye on the TV set. It is a documentary and should be approached as such. Most of the documentation is taken from those people or sources friendly to the United Nations. For instance, the opening sequence is a direct quote from Smith Hempstone, African correspondent for the Chicago News. Hempstone's views, in his own words, are as follows, quote, "I do not belong to the American Committee for Aid to Katanga Freedom Fighters. I am not a member of the John Birch Society. I'm not in the pay of the Katanga government or Union Miniere, and really could not care less about the fluoridation of water. I am a registered Republican, although I did not vote Republican in the 1960 presidential election. I do believe that the United Nations has a role to play in the world today, and I believe that the US should remain in the international organization." Likewise, the 46 civilian doctors of Elizabethville, who provided some of the most horrifying eyewitness accounts of United Nations atrocities, have declared, quote, "We believe in the UNO. We proclaim that such an organization is necessary for maintaining peace in the world and fair betterment of the underdeveloped nations." While on the subject of Katanga, it should be made clear that the section of this book dealing with the Congo is not meant to be a glorification of Katanga and Shombe. It is meant to spotlight the United Nations action in Katanga. We are not being asked to pay homage to Katanga, nor are we being asked to transfer our political sovereignty, our economy, and our military security to Katanga. We are being asked to do these things for the United Nations. It is for this reason that we need to take a close and searching look at this mammoth organization. And just as one picture is worth 1,000 words, one case history is worth 1,000 theoretical arguments. This is by no means an exhaustive treatment of the subject. If the reader wants a detailed explanation of the structure of the United Nations, how the organization functions mechanically, or what relation one subdivision has with another, he can find countless volumes in a public library. All of this is academic in the minds of most people anyway. The citizens of Katanga, who were dying under United Nations bombs, were not concerned over whether the air attacks had been authorized by the Security Council, the General Assembly, or the Military Staff Committee, or whether it took 2/3 vote or only a majority vote. Nor has the tremendous financial burden that membership in the United Nations places on the shoulders of American taxpayers been discussed. After all, mere money is relatively unimportant. If the UN really were what most people think it is, it would be well worth the investment. The real cost of our membership will not, in the end, be measured in terms of dollars and cents. It will be counted out in terms of lost freedoms, despair, and human suffering. This is not an attempt to present an, quote, objective view of the United Nations. If the reader wants to acquaint himself with the other side, he need only turn on his radio or TV or glance through the pages of his favorite newspaper or magazine. The other side has been presented almost without challenge by every conceivable means. Books, movies, plays, speeches, editorials, pamphlets, posters, and poetry. It has been promoted by politicians, athletes, movie stars, teachers, beauty queens, and businessmen. By comparison, the case against the United Nations has been relegated almost entirely to the media of mimeographed newsletters and hastily compiled fact sheets put out by housewives and neighborhood study groups. Radio and TV time is usually denied on the basis that such a point of view is, quote, controversial. It is as though history had slipped back 450 years when Galileo attempted to demonstrate the theory that the Earth was not the center of the universe. He was imprisoned and condemned as follows, quote, "We say, pronounce, sentence, and declare that you, the said Galileo, by reason of the matters adduced in this trial, and by you confessed as above, have rendered yourself, in the judgment of this holy office, vehemently suspected of heresy, namely of having believed and held the doctrine, which is false and contrary to the sacred and divine scriptures, that the sun is the center of the world and does not move from east to west, and that the earth moves and is not the center of the world. Consequently, you have incurred all the censures and penalties imposed and promulgated in the sacred canons and other constitutions, general and particular, against such delinquents. Now, as then, history will be the judge. G. Edward Griffin." What an excellent foreword, telling you exactly the angle that he's coming at this from, and laying out his case. Very somber terms, quite more somber than I expected it to be. I'm just going to have a sip. But it sounds like he's dealing with some quite horrific stuff. Really well written. I don't think I stumbled or fluffed any of that reading, which, if those of you checked out my Next Million Years, Charles Galton Darwin's writing was awful and really tricky to read, and I was stumbling and rewording and going back and repeating myself quite a bit. But G. Edward Griffin's his prose is very, very smooth, and I think I think we're going to enjoy reading this. So a quick view of the contents there. We got 4 parts to the book. Part 1 is Katanga, a case history. I'd never heard of this place Katanga before, so I'm looking forward to getting into that. We've got 56 pages for part 1. Not sure if we'll get through all that tonight. We might be able to do, 20 or 30 pages or so. We'll see how we get on. Part 1, a Katanga case history. Okay. Regret your odious lie constituted by statement that UNL mercenaries do not fire at Red Cross ambulances and others. Stop. You would be authorized to speak after spending night with us in hospital bombarded by your shameless and lawless ruffians. That's a telegram to U Tant from the 46 civilian doctors of Elizabethville in the Congo. And so just a reminder of that's I think where this extra document came in, the 46 angry men, is that's what it's referring to. So we'll definitely get into this at some point. Maybe after we finish part 1, we'll go through this as well. Okay, chapter 1, the first spade. It was December the 12th, 1961. Christmas was coming to Katanga. Smith Hempstone, African correspondent for the Chicago News, reported from Elizabethville, quote, "The United Nations jets next turned their attention to the center of the city. Screaming in at treetop level while excited soldiers and white civilians popped away at them with anything from 22 pistols to submachine guns, they blasted the post office and radio station, severing Katanga's communications with the outside world. One came to the conclusion that the United Nations action was intended to make it more difficult for correspondents to let the world know what was going on in Katanga. Since the only way press dispatches could be filed was to drive them 150 miles to northern Rhodesia over a road studded with tribal roadblocks and subject to United Nations air attacks. By December the 12th, 1961, mortar shells hailed down on the center of the city as the softening up process began. Among the military objectives hit, a beautiful shop, the apartment of the French consul, Sabina Airways office, the Roman Catholic Cathedral, the Elizabethville Museum. A car pulled up in front of the Grand Hotel Leopold II, where all of us were staying. "Look at the work of the American criminals," sobbed the Belgian driver. "Take a picture and send it to Kennedy." In the back seat, his eyes glazed with shock, sat a wounded African man, cradling in his arms the body of his 10-year-old son. The child's face and belly had been smashed to jelly by mortar fragments. Whoops, sorry. Just trying to get the focus right on the camera there. Did that help? I think I just made it worse. Okay. The 46 civilian doctors of Elizabethville unanimously issued a joint report on the United Nations actions against Katanga, which included the following account of the December 12, 1961 bombing of the Shinkolobwe Hospital. Quote, "The Shinkolobwe Hospital is visibly marked with an enormous red cross on the roof of the administrative pavilion. At about 8 a.m., 2 aeroplanes flew over the hospital twice at very low altitude. At about 9:30 a.m., the aeroplanes started machine gunning the market square, and then the school, and the hospital in which there were about 300 patients and their families. The administrative building, the left wing of the 4 pavilions and the household buildings were bombed and show hundreds of points of impact made by the machine gun bullets. In the maternity, roof, ceilings, walls, beds, tables, and chairs are riddled with bullets. A bomb exploded in another pavilion which was luckily unoccupied. The roof, the ceiling, half of the walls and the furniture have been blasted and shattered. The blood from the wounded makes the buildings look like battlefield. In the maternity, 4 Katangan women who had just been delivered and 1 newborn child are wounded. A visiting child of 4 years old is killed. 2 men and 1 child are killed. Out of the 300 patients, 240 fled into the bush, refusing to be evacuated to any other hospital, for they say, quote, "The UNO prefers to aim at the hospitals, and we would henceforth no longer feel safe there." So that quote I just read is actually from 46 Angry Men, pages 60 to 63. Professor Ernest van den Haag made a personal visit to the Congo to witness firsthand the events and conditions there. There's a footnote down here. It says, after teaching at City College and the University of Minnesota, Professor Ernest van den Haag became a member of the faculty of New York University and the New School for Social Research. He lectures widely and is the author of Education as an Industry and of The Fabric of Society, the latter a widely used textbook in the social sciences. He has published many articles in American and foreign learned journals. Professor van den Haag is a fellow of the American Sociological Association and of the Royal Economic Society. In commenting on the United Nations statement that the only civilians wounded in Katanga were combatants in the resistance, he said, quote, "It is hard to speak, as I did, with a mother whose husband was killed at home in her presence with bayonets by UN soldiers. She was in the hospital to help take care of her 6-year-old child, severely wounded by United Nations bayonets. A child's bayonet wounds are hardly due to having been suspected of being mercenary or combatant." End quote. The doctors of Elizabethville reported the triple and particularly heinous assassination of 3 elderly people on December the 16th, 1961, as follows. Quote, "The boy of Mr. Derrick's, Mr. Andre Kapenga, a witness, relates that nothing special occurred until 1:45 p.m. At this moment, the old cook, Mr. Jean Fimbo, has just brought coffee into the drawing room, and Mr. Guillaume Derrick's 60-year-old Belgian, and his elderly mother, aged 87, who lives with him, are about to drink it. At that moment, an armoured car of the UNO takes up position on the path and is machine gunning the other side of the valley. When the firing has ceased, United Nations mercenaries enter the garden and machine gun the two cars parked in the garage. The boy, Andre Kapenga, is panic-stricken. He locks himself in the food store next to the kitchen. The soldiers climb the stairs leading from the garage to the kitchen and with a burst of machine gun fire shoot Mr. Jean Fimbo, who has sought refuge under the sink. Enter the drawing room where Mr. Derricks, who cries out in English, "Not me," is shot down by a bullet and is finished off by a burst which blows off half of his face and skull. A few seconds later, a third burst hits Mrs. Derricks in the right breast and in the neck. At about 5 p.m., the boy, Kapenga, hears the soldiers once more entering the villa, where they run about, looting to a slight extent before leaving. Soon after, Mr. Kapenga ventures out of his hiding place and, horrified at the sight of the three bodies, runs away and hides himself in a loft. End quote. Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs G. Menon Williams, speaking in Detroit, accused the Katangese government of fabricating what he called, quote, horrendous tales of indiscriminate mayhem by United Nations troops during their December attack on Katanga. Millions of Americans read Williams' assurances in their newspapers and were relieved. Practically no one has read Smith Hempstone's reply. Quote, unquestionably, the Katanga Information Service had played up United Nations atrocities, real and imagined, for all they were worth. Williams might have been in a better position to judge, however, had he spent some time in Elizabethville's Leo II, while UN mortar shells rained down during those last days before Christmas. Every newsman there had seen civilians shelled with his own eyes. Each of us had seen Red Cross vehicles destroyed by United Nations fire. Or were all of us lying? George Alavet, the Swedish Red Cross representative, lay in his shallow grave in testimony that we were not. Sanchez de Gramont of the New York Herald Tribune might well have sent Williams a few pieces of the shrapnel picked from his body after United Nations troops shot up the civilian car in which he was leaving Elizabethville. End quote. Much has happened since December the 12th, 1961. Like any point along the infinite corridor of time, it is neither the beginning nor the end. But it is a reference point, a handhold on an otherwise glass-smooth sphere too large to grasp in its entirety. The story of Katanga, its tragic struggle for freedom against the United Nations, and the part that this story plays in the overall view of the United Nations itself is so vast, so huge and overpowering that it seems impossible to find a place to begin. But, like most seemingly overwhelming tasks, it is not as important where one begins as it is that one does begin. To move a mountain, one must dig. December the 12th, 1961 is the first spade. Whoa. I mean, just gonna have a sip. Well, harrowing, really harrowing. This reminds me a little bit of the Lusitania, reading the accounts of people who were on the ship as it went down, the survivors, and, you know, the witness that they were to the tragedy of that day and that event. It's hard going, it's heavy going, but I think we are in safe hands with G. Edward Griffin, and it is all very much relevant, even though it is quite hard reading and quite poignant. Just quickly check the comments, what we got. Plane Drifter, G. Edward Griffin, the United Nations Peace Dove Unmasked. This is a download PDF on archive.org. Oh, nice one. Thank you for that, Plane Drifter. Total Blackout Painting. This is the first time I caught a stream. Sound is great. Layout is good. Very engaging. Thank you very much. I appreciate that feedback. I really do. Jam Hashwish over on Rumble. leaves a comment. Thank you for that. Hello, and thank you for reading and delving into some amazing books. Found your channel looking for Fabian Freeway. Oh, awesome. Yeah. Enjoy Fabian Freeway. That was that Fabian Freeway ties in very much with this, because the Fabians got together before the establishment of the League of Nations. So that helps explain this gradual penetration and permeation of political parties and universities and other and working unions in order to get the foundation in place for this type of supranational organization, which the United Nations is. So yeah, good to have you here, Jam Hashwish. ESP is here as well, over on Odyssey. Good to have you here. And ESP says, tell me the Deagle report is fake. I would love to tell you the Deagle report is fake. I really would. Oh, Newsfist as well, over on Entropy. Wonderful. Just wanted to wish you the best of luck with the new book. I'll catch up later. Awesome. Thank you so much, Newsfist. Check out Newsfist for news content. I don't cover the news so much, but when I do look for news, I like to get it from Newsfist, because it comes from a place of awareness with regards to the kind of topics that we cover on this channel, rather than just pushing fear and alarmism and scary stuff. Newsfist is bringing that bigger, wider historical context, kind of like in the vein of Grand Theft World as well. But he does a twice weekly show, and it's very good. And so I would happily and wholeheartedly recommend people go and check out Newsfist. He's in the Telegram chat as well, so you can get to know him there and see when he goes live, Mondays and Thursdays usually. Awesome. All right. Let's crack on. We'll do another one. Oh, we're only an hour and a half into it. We've got loads of time. Fantastic. Okay. Chapter 2. Prologue to Tragedy. If the Congo does go communist, it will not be because of Soviet strength or because the Congolese people want communism. It will be because of UN policy in the Congo and because of the perverse following that induces us to support this policy with our prestige and our money. That's a quote from Senator Thomas Dodd, November 1962. To fully understand this Christmas tragedy in Katanga, one must be familiar with at least a few events and personalities that were the principal parts of the prologue. It is not necessary to go into the rich and interesting history of Africa itself over the past 2 or 3 centuries, although such an exercise would undoubtedly be intellectually rewarding. Nor is it necessary to catalogue the vast and varied mineral wealth of Africa, and particularly of Katanga. Let it suffice to say here that such wealth is considerable. It is undoubtedly one of the factors which has caused behind-the-scenes manipulators from both East and West to bring their full influence to bear on the international frontmen who have seemingly shaped the events in Katanga. In fact, we need only go back a few years in time and concentrate our attention on a rather small number of actors in this tragic play. We can safely ignore the cast of millions and the supporting roles of hundreds of walk-ons and bit players who have paraded across the stage. Most of these either have been written into the play to dazzle the critics, or else they were never really part of the play at all, just a collection of stagehands and stand-ins who were accidentally caught in the shifting spotlight. So just on the topic there of players being written in to dazzle the critics, the first thing that popped into my mind was Leonardo DiCaprio jet-setting around the world, lecturing people, on energy usage and accepting climate change as a man-made thing, and the measures which are being baked into the corporate policy of our governments, our corporations, which affect us and basically amount to more control, more surveillance, less opportunity and less freedom for everybody. They use Leonardo DiCaprio and his clout as a well-known actor to push this on people, and people believe it and think, well, it must be true because I like Leonardo DiCaprio and he was in a film I like, and he wouldn't go around doing this if it wasn't true. Okay, continuing. Let us set the stage. The date is now June the 30th, 1960. For many months, radio stations in Red China, communist Czechoslovakia, and Romania have been beaming inflammatory propaganda broadcasts into Africa, attempting to agitate the populations into active support for the traditional Soviet program of anti-colonialism. And so the reference for that, there's a footnote there, it says Pieter Lessing, Africa's Red Harvest. And that's the book, I think, 1962. Pieter Lessing was born and educated in South Africa. He comes from an old Afrikaans family. He was a war correspondent during the Second World War and has since served as a foreign correspondent for British and American news services, including the BBC. He has lived in many countries and has spent a considerable amount of time behind the Iron Curtain. He has also traveled extensively in Africa. So that's another book there that might be worth looking up. As defined by the communists, this slogan means to break away all colonial holdings from non-communist countries like Belgium, Portugal, France, and England. The communists, of course, are not acting out of humanitarian instincts when they do this. Their purpose is twofold. First, they know that breaking away these colonial holdings will unavoidably weaken the non-communist countries that have them and depend on them for much of their economic viability and, to some extent, for their military national security. The second reason is that a newly emergent government with its inexperienced leadership is relatively easy to infiltrate and subvert to the cause of international communism. So this reminds me of Rose Martin in the Fabian Freeway book. One section of that book was talking about how the Fabians realized that for undeveloped countries, you could go straight to communism. But for developed countries that had more of a sort of free market capitalist or some other, maybe a monarchy, the best thing was to go to socialism first and then communism, right? I forget which part of the book that was, but it was definitely in there that they had different strategies depending on the country that they were targeting and that they wanted to sort of take over and gain control of. And this just backs that up. So, in one fell swoop, the communist program of anti-colonialism not only weakens their enemies, but also provides them with golden opportunities to capture still more of the Earth's terrain and population. Needless to say, the communists are not interested in discussing the granting of independence to their own colonial holdings, the captive nations behind the Iron Curtain. And there's a quote down here from Stalin in the footnote. It says, in 1920, Stalin wrote, quote, "We are for the secession of India, Arabia, Egypt, Morocco, and the other colonies from the Entente, because secession in this case would mean the liberation of those oppressed countries from imperialism and a weakening of the position of imperialism and a strengthening of the position of the revolution. We are against the secession of the border regions, a weakening of the revolutionary might of Russia, and a strengthening of the position of imperialism." And that's from a collection of articles on the national question from October 1920. Back to the reading. Be that as it may, by mid-1960, the worldwide communist drive of anti-colonialism had reached an all-time high. And this had been massively helped along by the work of the Fabian Society and their jet-setting around the world, giving speeches, and mainly targeting, in America at least, university students and trying to focus on the working class and university young people, idealistic people, trying to get them in that early stage of life before they've got lots of experience under their belt and they kind of are easy to sell ideas of utopia to young people, right? This promised utopia that the communists and socialists always say is just right around the corner. If we just, we just need to do a bit more looting and pillaging and wealth redistribution, and then we'll get there. The communist press in America was repeatedly instructing its readers to whip up mass popular support for the cause. All those who questioned the wisdom of this trend were branded, quote, imperialists, and their comments were buried in an avalanche of emotionalism. Exploitation, cruel and inhuman treatment of the natives, and humanitarian consideration were phrases shouted at anyone who doubted the wisdom of granting immediate independence to colonial areas. The great advances that had been made, the miraculous transplanting of civilization into regions totally primitive and savage, the progress that had been made in the cultural and educational levels of natives, even in the bush country. These and many other considerations were rarely mentioned. Apparently, they were not thought to be as good a vehicle for selling newspapers or gaining acclaim at the lectern as the more sensational stories of exploitation and profiteering. In keeping with the prevailing mood, communist and Afro-Asian delegates at the United Nations had initiated a series of resolutions calling for the immediate independence of the Belgian Congo. The United States also went on record in favour of this position and exerted no small amount of pressure on the Belgian government to comply. Finally, after a few sporadic anti-colonial demonstrations in the Congo, Belgium yielded to international pressure. On June 30th, 1960, the Congo was granted independence. The first character of importance to appear on stage is one Patrice Lumumba. What kind of man was he? What were his motives, his objectives? These questions can be answered succinctly. He was a deranged and degenerate dope addict. He was a willing agent of the communists. He worked tirelessly to bring chaos, anarchy, and bloodshed to the Congo as the necessary first stage toward his ultimate goal of complete and unlimited dictatorship, with himself nominally at the top and with communist power to back him up. This may come as quite a shock to many who remember the glowing praises sung for this man a few years ago in the highest echelons of our government and in our communications media. But for the skeptic who still can't quite bring himself to believe that government officials and news editors ever could be mistaken, let the record speak for itself. It was well known that for at least 2 years the Soviets had been supplying Lumumba with arms, ammunition, military vehicles, and other necessary supplies to ensure an appropriate, spontaneous uprising of the people against their colonial imperialist masters. In addition to the hardware, they provided $400,000 a month with which to buy followers and provide them with the little extras that ensure loyalty, such as cars, extravagant parties, and women. Lumumba's communist backing was widely acknowledged and had been described in detail in both the House of Representatives and the Senate. So just a side comment here that I just think it's funny how in order to prop up and support the communists, you need the money. You need the money and the cars and the extravagant parties and the women. So the question, as always with communists and communism, is where does the money come from? I'm sure people watching this will probably be aware of Anthony C. Sutton's work, Wall Street, the Wall Street trilogy, and he's got the book Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution. Very key stuff to know and understand, and bear in mind when reading G. Edward Griffin, who kind of leans quite heavily on this the communists as the bogeyman. But, you know, kind of reminds me as well of the Fabian group. Many of them were very wealthy, or at least upper middle class, and they had yearly incomes that were earned through the industriousness of their ancestors and they inherited wealth and money. And so for them to go around pushing socialism and communism on other people and preaching, it was very hypocritical, but they have to have money and support coming from somewhere. So it's not so clear cut that you're either a socialist or a communist or a capitalist, right? These things are very intertwined and they're very connected and related and kind of like two sides of the same coin in a very meaningful way, because the end result of a communist system or a socialist system tends to be, you know, a small group with massive amounts of wealth. And yet we're told that that is the end result of capitalism. And that capitalism is to blame for that. Even though when socialism and communism have been rolled out, the same thing happens. You get this tiny elite with all the money and the power and the cars and the women, right? So, yeah, just a few thoughts that paragraph triggered for me. Continuing. Writing in the Brooklyn Tablet on April the 15th, 1961, Bishop Fulton J. Sheen said, quote, Lumumba set up a communist organization among his fellow tribesmen, the Batatelas, making them believe that he was the incarnation of his ancestors. During the elections, Lumumba's troops destroyed most of the ballot boxes of the other candidates. The plans for the communist revolution in the Congo were prepared in Prague, and in the first 3 months, Lumumba carried out the first 3 points of the plan: to organize mutiny in the army, put the blame on the Belgians, and organize a terrorist regime. End quote. Although few Americans knew it at the time, or know it even now, evidence of communist support for Lumumba was so plentiful and undeniable that Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld felt obliged to reassure the non-communist world that Soviet aid to Lumumba was actually in support of United Nations policy, and therefore, presumably, quite all right. Even Connor Cruz O'Brien, chief United Nations representative in Katanga, admitted that the Soviets had given Lumumba 100 trucks, 29 transport planes, and 200 technicians. These figures, of course, were an underestimation. For one thing, they did not include the more than 200 Russian and Czechoslovakian diplomats who were by then swarming all over the Congo. And finally, as revealed later by Colonel Joseph Mobutu, who had been serving under Lumumba, Red China had promised Lumumba $2.8 million in aid. So communists have to be funded, the money's got to come from somewhere. And there is a case in point. Lumumba had written, quote, "If necessary, I shall not hesitate to call in the devil to save the country. I am convinced that with the unreserved support of the Soviets, I shall win the day in spite of everything." End quote. That's quite a bold statement, isn't it? I shall not hesitate to call in the devil. So the footnotes there, footnote 11 for the word devil says, "There is much evidence to indicate that devil is actually a code name used by African communists when referring to the Soviet Union." Oh, wow. And the footnote 12 at the end of that quote I just read is from a UN document, "Serious and Irrevocable Decisions Reached by the Government of the Republic of the Congo." And that is UN document A/4711/ADD, pages 41 to 42. Joseph Yav, a former Lumumba associate and economics minister of his government until July the 17th, 1960, made the following statement to Philippa Schuyler, an American reporter in the Congo at the time of independence. Quote, "Yes, Lumumba is a communist. I know it. I have proof. This does not mean Lumumba understands the ideological theories of communism or its intellectual background. He's never read Das Kapital. He went red not for mental convictions, but because he was bought. On his visit to Russia and East Germany, he was given money, presents, girls, and lavish hospitality. He never looked behind the glitter to see the real foundation of these slave states." End quote. And that quote I just read is actually from the book Who Killed the Congo by Philippa Schuyler. This, of course, is the general pattern of recruitment into the Communist Party in those parts of the world where there is not a sufficient group of so-called intellectuals from which to draw. The communists much prefer the intellectual type since they are more easily ensnared, and it is less expensive to keep them hooked on the party line. But in Africa, they have to use money and flattery to accomplish what intellectual deception and flattery will accomplish for them in the more, quote, advanced countries. This point was graphically brought home by Gabriel Kitenge, national president of the Congolese Union Party, when he told the same reporter, quote, "The communists have bribed scores of Congo political leaders with trips, girls, gifts, cars, and flattery. The Congolese never rose above lower middle class living under the Belgians, so they are hungry for luxuries. They will do anything for luxuries. Ideologies and principles are vague and far off to them. It's the eloquent message of material things that they listen to. I have tried to tell American consular officials here of the grave danger that the Congo will go red after independence, but they don't listen to me. I beg of you, tell your newspaper readers in America of the grave communist menace that threatens here. Beg them to pressure their congressmen in Washington to do something about it. Don't let the West abandon us." If further evidence is needed of the bond between Lumumba and his communist masters, one need only note that Khrushchev changed the name of the People's Friendship University near Moscow to the Patrice Lumumba Friendship University in honor of this great African leader. Wow, That's pretty interesting. The Arabs were the first to introduce hashish cultivation to the Congo. It has since become one of the chief vices throughout the entire region. Lumumba was well acquainted with the custom. Stuart Alsop of the Saturday Evening Post summed it up when he said, quote, "The notion that Lumumba was worshipped by Congolese masses was a myth. Lumumba was an accomplished demagogue. When he found the time between bouts of gin drinking and hashish smoking, he was also roundly hated for many reasons, most of them good." End quote. Lumumba's character and communist loyalties will be revealed even further as the Congo tragedy unfolds. But this is a fairly accurate description of the man for whom Washington rolled out the red carpet. Moise Tshombe was the second protagonist on our stage to receive world attention, though not the same type. Lumumba received. To start off with, Tshombe was an anti-communist, a handicap he never quite overcame in the American press. He was almost universally depicted as shrewd, a Belgian puppet, opportunistic, and the usual journalistic innuendos carefully designed to turn public opinion against a person about whom nothing specifically bad can be found. The truth of the matter is that Tshombe is the son of a successful African merchant, has earned a college degree, is a devout Christian, and had the overwhelming support and respect of the people who elected him to the presidency of Katanga. Not only is he a staunch anti-communist, he is an ardent advocate of the concepts of limited government and the free enterprise system. No wonder they were slagging him off in the newspapers and the media then. He is a student of history and a great admirer of the success of the American experiment. He fully understands the wisdom of the traditional American political system of checks and balances with a further division of power between the federal government and the states. Explaining his views, he said, quote, "We would like something rather on the American model. We are willing to have a federal president and to give the central government control of the army, the customs, and that sort of thing." Even after the United Nations had initiated a bloody war against Katanga to force it to abandon this position, Tshombe held firm. Returning to Katanga after the December United Nations attack, he said, quote, "Katanga must be unified with its brothers in the Congo but remain sufficiently free so that its fate will not be sealed on the day the shadow of communism spreads over this country." End quote. With this background in mind, it is not hard to see why Tshombe was anathema to the communists. Khrushchev ranted, quote, "Tshombe is a turncoat, a traitor to the interests of the Congolese people." It is interesting to note that Tshombe was also anathema to US officials. While whining and dining almost every communist dictator on the face of the earth, from Khrushchev to Tito to Castro to Lumumba, our State Department flatly refused to grant a visa for Tshombe to enter the United States. And the reference for that is number 20 down here, Visa Procedures of Department of State, Report of the Senate Internal Security Subcommittee. It's amazing, isn't it, that he couldn't get a visa and yet he was a fan of the American system and he liked the checks and balances and the election of a federal president and they wouldn't let him in. Yet they were letting Castro and Khrushchev and Lumumba. This is wild. All right. Plans for complete chaos in the Congo had been well laid. Many uneducated Africans were told that just as soon as independence came, they would automatically own all the property of the white settlers. And the settlers too. One of the campaign promises made by Lumumba was that the Congolese could have all of the European women they wanted after independence. It did not take very long. A few days after independence, the Congolese army mutinied against its Belgian officers. Lumumba reacted immediately by discharging the officers and expelling them from the country. He promoted every one of the mutinous soldiers at least one rank and moved up several to the level of general. Excuse me, just had to sneeze there. getting that classic live stream itchy nose. All men received a substantial pay rise. The lowest paid soldier was getting about twice that of an American GI of equivalent rank. Devoid of professional military command and whipped up by Lumumba and his followers, the Congolese army went on a spree of plunder, murder, and rape. European residents fled in terror by the thousands, leaving behind their homes, their possessions, their businesses, and everything they had worked for. Currency was frozen, and most of them left with only a hastily packed suitcase. Few Americans understood what was going on. Their news sources did not help them much. All attention was focused on the pictures of crying women being helped off planes and the sensational accounts of widespread rape. We were not given any insight into why this chaos had happened or who had triggered it. It was made to appear as something that just happened. Editors by the droves speculated, quote, "Well, what can you expect? After all those years of exploiting the natives, the Belgians are just reaping the harvest that they themselves have sown." Newswoman Philippa Schuler shed a little light on how it just happened when she reported, quote, "They had been maliciously egged on to start the disorder. In the wee hours of July the 9th, someone rushed into the barracks shouting, 'Come and fight! The whites are about to attack you! You are about to be killed!' No one was attacking the soldiers. It was a deliberate lie with frightful consequences." End quote. The Reverend Mark Poole of the Lulaberg Presbyterian Mission and other missionaries in the Congo confirmed that the outbreaks of violence were undoubtedly communist-inspired and that they were too widespread and well-coordinated to have just happened by chance. As soon as word of the chaos reached Brussels, Belgium ordered its troops back to the Congo to protect the lives and property of its citizens there. In a fit of rage, Lumumba officially declared war on Belgium and called on the United Nations for military help against Belgian intervention. The United Nations complied, as we shall see. At the outset, however, Belgium called on its NATO friend, the United States, for help so that it could not be accused of trying to perpetuate its influence in its former possession. Washington refused, saying it would rather act through the United Nations. Khrushchev lashed out against the Belgians, calling them criminal aggressors. The very same day, July the 14th, 1960, the United States delegation at the United Nations sided with the Soviets in a resolution stoutly condemning Belgium, demanding immediate withdrawal of her troops and authorizing the United Nations to send troops of its own to assist Lumumba. Within 4 days, the first 4,000 United Nations troops were flown into the Congo by U.S. Air Force planes. Many additional thousands were on the way. By July the 23rd, most of the Belgian troops had withdrawn. The territory was now in the hands of Lumumba's mutinous army and the United Nations, quote, peacekeeping forces. The plunder and rape continued and spread. Smith Hempstone reported, quote, "Not only was the United Nations singularly ineffective in re-establishing order in these regions, but it did little to assist in the evacuation of terrified white women and children from these provinces. The United Nations had planes available to evacuate to Stanleyville Gizengists. So this word I'm unfamiliar with, but Gizengists apparently means supporters of the communist Antoine Gizenga. Okay, that makes sense. The United Nations had planes available to evacuate to Stanleyville Gizengists who felt themselves in danger in areas under the control of the Leopoldville government, but it showed little interest in evacuating whites from Stanleyville. If a Lumumbist was maltreated, a general outcry could be expected from the communist bloc, the Afro-Asian nations, and from liberal circles in Britain and America. If a white woman was killed or molested, it made little difference. And that is from Philippa Schuler's book, Who Killed the Congo, 1962. Newswoman Schuler reported, quote, "A uniformed rabble was ruling Stanleyville. There was continual extortion, brawling, beating, and arbitrary arrests. Portuguese and Greeks had to pay as much as $60 to drunken soldiers to avoid arrest. Passengers arriving at Stanleyville's airport were met with a bayonet in the stomach, while Congolese loafers would scream, "We are the masters." Congolese seized European cars right and left, while UN Colonel Johanna Keitz said he could not intervene. Oh, apologies. That quote I just read was from Philippe Schuler. The previous one was from Hempstone. He did say that, didn't he? The following account appeared in the New York Daily News under the heading, "Congo Rebels Attack UN Train, Slay Kids." Quote, "Hundreds of rebel Baluba tribesmen yesterday massacred at least 20 Africans in 3 attacks on a UN-guarded train, taking schoolchildren home for a New Year's vacation. Scores of others were injured, and many passengers kidnapped by rebels after the attacks in South Katanga. The train left Elizabethville with some 300 passengers, including 100 children, and a strong guard of UN troops. But when it reached Kamina in western Katanga, only 40 people were aboard. At Luena, 3 passengers were killed, many were kidnapped, and the station was pillaged. Several African women passengers were raped. At Bukama, waves of tribesmen attacked the train again with spears, clubs, rifles, bows and arrows and machetes, killing 17 passengers and kidnapping many more. A spokesman said that the 17 persons who died at Bukama were killed under the eyes of the UN. Roger Nonkel, the Assistant High Commissioner of Sankuru in Kaisai Province, stated, quote, "The UN are unable to restore order, and what is more, they are not even trying. In August, I asked help for Lusambo from Colonel Lasmar, Colonel Lasmar is the chief of UN troops in Kasai. I told him that with 50 UN soldiers, I could prevent war between the Batetela, which is Lumumba's tribe, and the Baluba. He answered me coldly, 'Let them kill themselves.'" The communist plan for taking over the Congo was progressing as planned. Step 1, capture control of the leadership at the top. Step 2, bring about utter and complete chaos to justify the harsh police state measures which must be used to establish firm dictatorial rule. And step 3, put the blame on non-communists. Step 4, maneuver as many non-communists as possible into actually doing the dirty work for them. Now came the visible beginnings of step number 5, the police state measures themselves. This is a kind of, synchronistic with all the stuff that's going on in the UK at the moment. I'm just going to highlight and tab this page. Color should we use for this book? It's blue. Let's use blue tabs. And just that 5 steps that he just laid out there. I don't know. It's just kind of heavy because it sort of feels like it's going on right now in England. Okay, carry on. On August 2nd, 1960, the Congolese central government decreed that any Belgian business which had been abandoned during the mayhem would be confiscated by the state unless reclaimed within 8 days. The Congo's largest and most influential newspaper, Le Courrier d'Afrique, was seized by the government, forced to shut down, and its editor was thrown in jail for printing critical remarks about Lumumba. The editor was finally expelled to Belgium, and the paper resumed operation with a more, quote, acceptable editorial policy. Lumumba moved swiftly to consolidate his totalitarian control. On September the 15th, he issued the following lengthy and highly revealing directive to the heads of the various provinces throughout the Congo. Excuse me a sec, I'm just going to sniff. My nose is running a bit. I don't want you to have to listen to that. Okay, so subject. Measures to be applied during the first stages of the dictatorship. So this is Lumumba's directive. Sir, I have the honour and the pleasure to inform you that with a view to the rapid restoration of order in the country, the House of Representatives and the Senate of the central government meeting in special session on the 13th of September this year, decided to grant the government full powers. Wow. Full powers should be understood to mean that the government is free to act as it thinks fit in all respects for the purpose of suppressing abuses, disorders, and any action which is contrary to the will of the government over which I have presided legally since the attainment of independence by the Congo. The most effective and direct means of succeeding rapidly in our task may be summarized as follows. 1. Establish an absolute dictatorship and apply it in all its forms. 2. Terrorism, essential to subdue the population. Did you seriously write that? Holy crap. 3. Proceed systematically, using the army to arrest all members of the opposition. I will be personally responsible for those at Leopoldville, including the head of state and his close supporters. A few weeks ago, in view of the present situation in Katanga and Sud Kasai, I sent the National Army to arrest Tshombe and Kalonji, and even to kill them if possible. 4. Imprison the ministers, deputies and senators who sometimes abuse their parliamentary immunity. In such a case, I should be glad if you would not spare them, but arrest them all without pity and treat them with 10 times more severity than ordinary individuals. 5. Revive the system of flogging and give the rebels 10 lashes, morning and evening, for a maximum of 7 consecutive days. Note, double the number in the case of ministers, senators, and deputies, reducing the number gradually according to the condition of each individual. 6. Inflict profound humiliations on the people thus arrested, in addition to the obligatory treatment described above. For example, strip them in public, if possible in the presence of their wives and children, make them carry heavy loads, and force them to walk about in that state. In case of such a walk, however, drawers may be worn. 7. In view of the seriousness of the situation of the country, which is in danger of sinking into anarchy, it would be well to imprison repeated offenders in underground cells or prisons for at least 6 months, never allowing them out to breathe fresh air. Note, if some of them succumb as a result of certain atrocities, which is possible and desirable, the truth should not be divulged, but it should be announced, for instance, that Mr. X has escaped and cannot be found. 8. Those who do not succumb in prison should not be released for at least a year. In this case, they shall be exiled to a country to be determined by me in agreement with certain foreign countries which have already signified their agreement in principle. Some of the provincial presidents will say that the measures described are severe. In reply, I would point out to them that certain politicians have attained power by means of dictatorship. Moreover, the measures of execution that I have indicated above constitute only the first stage of the basic regime that we hope will succeed in the Congo. The second stage will be to destroy anyone who criticizes us. In conclusion, I would point out that this letter... Excuse me, I had to sneeze there. I would point out that this letter should be communicated only to those authorities under your orders in whom you have confidence. P. Lumumba, Prime Minister. Wow. Unbelievable. The footnote for that, 29, is a report of the UN Conciliation Commission for the Congo, UN document A/4711/ADD. A few months later, Lumumba issued a follow-up memorandum which said, "Get to work immediately and have courage. Long live the Soviet Union. Long live Khrushchev." When Lumumba came to the United States, he was royally received on behalf of the American people by President Eisenhower, who even had him stay in the official presidential guest house. He conferred with Henry Cabot Lodge, Dag Hammarskjöld, and Christian Herter, then our Secretary of State. And that's the reference for that is the New York Times. And a few weeks later, Eisenhower announced that he had sent the first $5 million of an expected $100 million to Lumumba to help the Congo meet its most pressing needs. So that reference for that is Lumumba gets pledge of U.S. aid, And that's Los Angeles Examiner, July 1960. Wow. Also, there's a couple of other references as well to back up that one. That is crazy. Just absolutely mind-boggling. That's the end of chapter 2. This is blowing my mind. I don't even have a bookmark. I'm just going to take a sip and review the comments if there are any. A bit snotty, I'm not sure why. This is wild. The reception, that guy getting such a warm welcome and reception in the US by President Eisenhower. What? Oh my God. Okay, what's going on here? I'm looking in YouTube chat. Oh wow, got quite a few comments. LJ says, "What a wonderful find." Yeah, I was really happy to get this. Very happy. Oh, I think I already read that bit. Johnny Fogg says Fabian Freeway was superb. Yeah, the book was really good. Rose Martin, it's a really great book. Really well referenced. Very solid research. Dense. You know, I probably forgot 60% of what's in that book, but it's a really, really solid piece of academic work. Rigorous research. You know. How's Dak? Hello. Welcome back. I missed the beginning. Good to see you back. What's your thoughts on the state of our country? I'm not even going to go there. I hope that it turns out better than the Congo did, than we're reading about right now. Plane Drifter mentions that Prime Minister is a Fabian, but his actions and his big corp history are close to fascism. He actually projecting himself with his words today. Yeah, the UK Prime Minister at the moment, I think I've heard that he's in the Trilateral Commission. He has spoken to the Fabian Society. His wife's involved with a bunch of people. Yeah, I think he really wants to bring out the authoritarian police state that we were just sort of reading about. That's kind of where I'm looking. Frank Lennon is here as well, saying Irish troops on a so-called peacekeeping mission in the Congo were killed in ambush by the Baluba tribesmen. Yeah. And LJ says, good grief, such evil, such cruel evilness. It is. It's heavy going and it's hard reading, for sure. Over on Rumble, Turbs says, just got home, gutted, gonna have to get this one on the catch-up. No problem. I hope you enjoy the catch-up and the replay. It will be live as soon as we wrap up. So, and then you get on the replay, you get to watch on double speed or at 1.5 speed. So that can be a bit more efficient. Nothing over at Odyssey for now. So that's cool. Adam's here. Hello, Adam. Welcome. You missed the start. No problem. You can go back and get it later on. Right, let's see how long the next chapter is, and we'll do another, and maybe we'll call it there. Don't want to tire myself out on my first video back. Let's see. That's not too bad. We got about 21, about 9 pages. We could probably do that, couldn't we? We'll do this next one, this next bit, chapter 3. But yeah, it really makes me want to read the Philippa Schuyler book. I'll just grab that and show you. Oh, that's my dog barking. So this is Who Killed the Congo. I haven't even opened this from the plastic wrapping that it came in. Who Killed the Congo? Schuyler. And there's a picture of her on the back. Quite an interesting woman, worth reading up about. She had mixed parentage, and I believe she was also like a very successful musician, maybe a pianist or something like that. And then she became her parents were really they were really against segregation. They were very much for racial equality, and they wanted to make the point that that mixed race children could fare very well, right? And so they got together, they had a mixed race child, and then at one point her mum fed her purely on a carnivore diet, and so she was given just meat and just meat to eat basically. And then she became a very successful, I think, musician. And then at some point she decided to become an investigative journalist, went to the Congo, covered all that, wrote that book over there that I just showed you. And then she also went to Vietnam to cover the Vietnamese War, and then tragically died in a helicopter accident. That's just a little bit that I picked up, I think, from Wikipedia or wherever else I read. But I have also This is the biography I have, just if anyone's interested in picking that up. The Life of Philippa Schuyler, composition in black and white. The Tragic Saga of Harlem's Biracial Prodigy. So I think that'd be another fantastic one to read as well at some point. Philippa Schuyler. So just one of those people that when I read about her, I thought, I want to know more. I want to know more about this person. Because one of those sort of heroes of history that you don't really hear about in the mainstream, and you have to kind of dig around and swim in the circles of alternative media to find out about these people. I'm just going to mute for a second before we do the next chapter. Not sure what the dog's barking at, but apologies if that's coming through on the mic and annoying people. She's got really good hearing, so whenever another dog barks in the town, she shouts back. I like to think she's just saying hello, in a really kind of aggressive way, like, hello! I think she's calmed down now, though. All right, chapter 3. Letter to Patrice Lumumba. Whenever in doubt, consult me, brother. We have been in the game for some time, and now we know how to handle the imperialists and colonialists. The only colonialist or imperialist that I trust is a dead one. That was Kwame Nkrumah, President of Ghana, 1960. Letter to Kwame Nkrumah. Thank you very much for your letter of July the 27th, expressing your thanks for the assistance which my government has been able to provide. I agree with you that the United Nations action in the Congo is a most heartening demonstration of the effectiveness with which the world community can cooperate. President Eisenhower, 1960. Eisenhower was a huge fan of these characters. Hashtag says the dog's telling them to shut up. The boss is reading. Yeah, she's on my side. Keep it down. Shut up. He's live streaming. You're disturbing the live stream. Shut up. All right. Chapter 3. Seceding from Chaos. I am seceding from chaos. With these words, Moise Tshombe declared that his province of Katanga wanted no further part of the communist-dominated central government. He requested Belgium to return her troops to the province, to subdue the mutinous Congolese army, and to restore civil order. This they did with little difficulty. Tshombe appointed a Belgian major to reorganize the army and re-establish military discipline. With experienced European officers predominantly in charge, a whole new army was recruited. Of the original 2,800 mutinous soldiers, only 300 were allowed to remain. Within a few days, life had returned to normal throughout most of Katanga. Businesses resumed operation, and civilians, once again, walked the streets with no fear of wanton violence. As one eyewitness observer described it, quote, Elizabethville, a bastion of anti-communism in a sea of Congo leftist terror, was calm and functioning smoothly in late August. As early as July the 21st, 1960, Patrick O'Donovan reported in the New York Herald Tribune, quote, there is good order in Elizabethville. The streets are patrolled by black and white soldiers together. There is almost no local opposition to Tshombe's plans. One of the very first acts of the newly independent nation was to discharge all of the red professors at Elizabethville University who had been attempting to indoctrinate and recruit students on behalf of international communism. Posters began to appear on the streets, Katanga, Africa's shield against communism, and Godfrey Munongo, the interior minister, reflected the views of the government when he stated, quote, I want my country, Katanga, to be a bastion of anti-communism in Africa. I detest communism and will not alter my position to it. Katanga will stay independent no matter what. We shall not give in. To the leaders of Katanga, Independence did not mean that they were unwilling to cooperate with other provinces, to enter into a specifically limited political union with them, or even to share the rather substantial tax revenues obtained from the extensive mining operations within their territory. As mentioned earlier, Dushanbe wanted a federal union and local autonomy somewhat similar to that in America. Commenting on his vision for the future, Dushanbe explained, quote, "Katanga is nearly as large as France. Our people have a different history, traditions, and outlook from those of the Congo. Every people has the right to its own self-determination. There is no reason why we should be exploited by the Congo. Because we were in the past is no reason why we should be in the future." This attitude was even written into the newly established constitution. Article 1 read, quote, "The state of Katanga adheres to the principle of the association with the other regions of the former Belgian Congo, provided they themselves are politically organized with respect to law and order." As we have already seen, however, the central government had other plans, and so did the United Nations. As to what those intentions were, one cannot readily find them in the high-sounding phrases and self-righteous platitudes of official United Nations proclamations. They are there, but one has to be experienced in the highly complex art of reading bureaucraties. While most human beings communicate with each other to convey ideas, politicians are prone to use language as a means of concealing ideas. An example of this planned deception is the blatant contradiction between the United Nations public pronouncements regarding Katanga and its actual performance. On July the 14th, 1960, the same day that the Security Council passed the first resolution condemning Belgium and authorizing the use of United Nations troops in the Congo, and again on July the 20th, Dag Hammarskjöld stated the UN's position. 1. The United Nations force could not intervene in the internal affairs of the Congo. 2. It would not be used to settle the Congo's constitutional issue. 3. It would not be used to end Katanga's secession. In July, Ralph Bunche, a special United Nations representative for Hammarskjöld, told Dushanbe that the United Nations force, quote, "has received strict instructions not to intervene in the internal politics of the country." On August the 9th, the Security Council passed another resolution which, quote, "reaffirms that the UN Congo force will not be a party to, or in any way intervene in or be used to influence the outcome of any internal conflict, constitutional or otherwise." In speaking specifically about Katanga's secession, Dag Hammarskjöld said, quote, "This is an internal political problem to which the UN as an organization obviously cannot be a party. Nor would the entry of the UN force in Katanga mean any taking of sides in the conflict to which I have just referred, nor should it be permitted to shift the weight between personalities or groups or schools." Apologies, I'm missing like the edge of the page because of the way it's been printed, so I'm kind of just filling in the blanks. So apologies if it's not flowing quite as well as it usually does. Nor should it be permitted to shift the weight between personalities or groups or schools or thought in a way which would prejudice the solution of the internal political problem. Nothing could have been plainer than that. Yet immediately, United Nations troops began to move into position for entry in Katanga. Dushanbe was leery of the whole operation and protested to Hammarskjöld that since everything was calm and peaceful in his province, there was no need for United Nations peacekeeping forces. On August the 12th, Hammarskjöld personally conveyed his assurances to Dushanbe that the United Nations would not be used on behalf of the central government to force the provisional government of Mr. Dushanbe to a specific line of action. With the solemn pledges and under Hammarskjöld's insistence, Dushanbe had no alternative short of armed resistance but to allow UN troops access to Katanga. They came by the thousands. As mentioned earlier, Katanga was at peace. There were other places throughout the Congo that were in far greater need of UN forces than Katanga. Kasai province was in the throes of civil war, and the countryside was literally red with blood. But the UN sent troops to Katanga. Stanleyville was a nightmare of lawlessness and violence, but the UN sent troops to Katanga. Away from the metropolitan areas, the practice of cannibalism was being revived, and missionaries were being slaughtered by the score, but the UN sent troops to Katanga. By September 1961, between 12,000 and 14,000 troops, by far the greater portion of the entire United Nations force, had been concentrated inside peaceful Katanga. Why were they there? Only a fool could believe that their purpose was anything other than to end Katanga's secession and to bring it back under the central government. Dushanbe was no fool. In spite of the grim implications of the arrival of UN military might, he somehow managed to keep his composure and even his sense of humour. The first United Nations troops to arrive at Elizabethville's airport on August the 12th were supposedly Dag Hammarskjöld's personal bodyguard. When they landed, Dushanbe greeted them and the accompanying dignitaries by handing them each tourist brochures entitled "Elizabethville welcomes you." Then, before anyone could object, the honour guard led by Belgian officers presented the Katangese colours while a band played the newly written Katangese national anthem. What a picture that must have been. United Nations soldiers, officers, and dignitaries standing rigidly at attention before a fluttering flag symbolising the very sovereignty which they had been sent to destroy. At this point in the drama, it becomes necessary to introduce a third character, Connor Cruz O'Brien. Oh, is this the one you mentioned, Frank? Yeah, Frank said Connor Cruz O'Brien was an Irishman, a writer, and for a short period of time, an Irish national politician. Oh, thank you for that. Mr. O'Brien was formerly an Irish delegate to the General Assembly of the UN before being requested by Dag Hammarskjöld to join his executive staff on the Secretariat as Special Advisor on African Affairs. From here, he was assigned to the Congo, where he personally directed the United Nations political operation in Katanga. When it was discovered that he had imported his Irish girlfriend to Katanga, and when she found herself unexpectedly in the news as part of an international incident, O'Brien was recalled to New York and allowed to resign. There were other good reasons for getting rid of O'Brien too. For one thing, he was too outspoken, and it soon became obvious that he had to be removed. He was not the first underling in the UN to be thrown to the wolves in order to save the reputation of a higher official. Excuse me. Fortunately, however, O'Brien decided to write a book about the Katanga affair. It is a treasure of little glimpses into the innermost workings of the mind of an international servant. He was and is a fierce advocate of the United Nations. He clings to all of the intellectual fallacies about the United Nations, which will be the subject of a later chapter, even though he had personally participated in and helped to execute one of the more perfidious schemes ever directed against freedom-loving human beings. He apparently did not realize what he had done, or so he says. The important point, however, is that O'Brien speaks with authority. He was there, obviously. A great deal of what he has to say must be taken with a large grain of salt. But what he reveals about both himself and the organization to which he is so strongly committed is, if anything, overly charitable. If O'Brien's words are incriminating in spite of his pro-United Nations bias, then they are certainly worthy of our serious consideration. For example, O'Brien's description of a meeting of the Congo Club, which is the nickname for his group of the United Nations planners and advisors on the Congo. Among others, Dag Hammarskjöld and Ralph Bunche, representing the US, were present. Quote, "The Afro-Asian thesis that the secession of Katanga would have to be ended and that the United Nations would have to help actively in ending it was tacitly accepted round the table, and not less by the Americans than the others. What mattered most to all of them was that the United Nations should emerge successfully from its Congo ordeal, and it was clearly seen that the condition of success was the speedy removal of the props of Tshisekedi's regime, thereby making possible the restoration of the unity of the Congo. The continued existence of the independent state of Katanga was recognized as a threat to the existence of the United Nations, and therefore even those who, from the standpoint of their personal political opinions, might have been favorably enough disposed to what Mr. Tshisekedi represented, was convinced of the necessity of strong measures. This was an example of the victory of an international loyalty over personal predilections. If neutral men are simply men who put the interest of the United Nations first, then Hammarskjöld and all around him at that table were neutral men. What's the book here that he's referring to? O'Brien's book. Has he told us what it is yet? I missed that reference. I could find it later, but it does sound like a good one to get a hold of. Yeah, I can't find it. If anybody spotted that. Oh, here we are. To Katanga and Back, Connor Cruz O'Brien. Oh, is that the one that I already got? Oh, yeah, I do. I already got that. It's over there. Okay, never mind. That's me just having a brain fart. So, success of the United Nations depends on making sure that Tshisekedi's regime was collapsed and Katanga was folded back into the central government. Ignoring for the moment the enlightening definition of UN neutrality, one should really go back and reread this incredible statement several times to fully comprehend the extent of the calm premeditation behind the policy of deliberate deception initiated by those high officials. For months, they had been issuing public statements and personal assurances that the United Nations not only had no intentions of interfering in the internal matter of Katanga's secession, but that it had no legal right to do so under the terms of its own charter. Yet, at the very outset, O'Brien, Hammarskjöld, Bunch, and a host of other top United Nations planners sat around a conference table and quietly worked out plans for removing, quote, the props of Mr. Tshisekedi's regime. Elsewhere in his book, O'Brien provided more illumination on the United Nations' total lack of integrity and respect for honesty in its pretended aims when he wrote that Mr. M. Kieri, head of the UN Civil Operations in the Congo, quote, had little patience with legalistic detail, with paragraph this of resolution that, or what the Secretary-General had said in August 1960. He had no patience at all with the theory, often asserted in the early days by Hammarskjöld and never explicitly abandoned, that the United Nations must refrain from interfering in the internal affairs of the Congo. What are we here for then, he would ask. Il faut faire de la politique. And on the word politique, his brown eyes, usually so disconcertingly blank, would flash. He and Mr. Gardner, another UN official, did make politics, throwing all semblance of non-intervention to the winds. While the United Nations was pouring troops into Katanga, things were going from bad to horrible elsewhere in the Congo. On August the 4th, when Lumumba returned in a Russian plane from his grand tour of Belgium, the United States, and England, he found unexpected opposition awaiting. Many of his former associates had decided they no longer wanted to be identified with either him or his politics. On August the 10th, Lumumba was seized and stoned by an angry mob in Leopoldville and barely escaped with his life. On August the 25th, more anti-Lumumba demonstrations and riots broke out all over the city. Meanwhile, a small group of former British Army officers from Rhodesia had entered Kasai province and formed a volunteer corps of leaders to train Baluba tribesmen for battle against Lumumba's men. They explained that they were sick of the West doing nothing to effectively fight the Congo's Reds. On September the 5th, Kasavubu, president of the central government and a rather weak-kneed politician, but not a communist, dismissed Prime Minister Lumumba. Lumumba refused to acknowledge the action and promptly dismissed Kasavubu. At that point, the lower house and the Senate both convened illegally without a quorum. The House invalidated both dismissals. The Senate declared its confidence in Lumumba. Complete confusion and anarchy reigned supreme. Finally, on September the 14th, a young army colonel by the name of Joseph Mobutu, using what military power he could muster, picked up the pieces and seized control of the government. Kasavubu threw his support behind him, and they appointed a committee of college graduates to run things temporarily. A semblance of order once again returned. The Student Council, as they were nicknamed, acting under the leadership of Mobutu and Kasavubu, did a far more effective job of restoring order than the official government under Lumumba had done. Here was obviously a bad turn of events for the communists. They had not planned on this. Mobutu promptly ordered all the Russian and Czechoslovakian diplomats and technicians to pack their bags and leave the country. Seeing power slip from him, Lumumba sought United Nations protection and quietly moved into the Guinean embassy. Just bear with me a second, I'll be right back. Apologies about that. It is both interesting and significant that Lumumba chose this particular embassy for asylum. Mobutu had appeared to the United Nations to withdraw the Guinean and Ghanaian contingency from its peacekeeping forces in the Congo because he had found letters in Lumumba's briefcase which clearly linked these troops with the communists. It appeared to be common knowledge throughout the Congo that many of the United Nations soldiers were openly pro-communist. They were apparently selected for that reason. As Philippa Schuler reported, quote, "There have been many complaints from anti-communists in the Congo that UN soldiers from certain left-leaning nations have been spreading leftist or communist propaganda or otherwise actively aiding the Red cause. Some African UN officers I interviewed surprised me by revealing they spoke Russian, had visited Russia, and were openly sympathetic to the Red cause. The UN opens the doors to communism," was a comment I heard all over the Congo. End quote. Just as a quick aside, it is interesting to note that Kwame Nkrumah, the Prime Minister of Ghana, has written that he long ago decided the philosophy of Marx and Lenin was capable of solving his country's problem. He has consistently supported the Soviet Union and Cuba in the United Nations. In 1960, Red China announced that it would extend $25 million in aid to Ghana over a 3-year period. And in 1962, the Kremlin awarded Nkrumah the Lenin Peace Prize. In speaking of the award, his own newspaper described him as the Lenin of Africa. One of the letters found in Lumumba's briefcase had been written by Nkrumah personally and said, quote, "Whenever in doubt, consult me, brother. We have been in the game for some time, and now we know how to handle the imperialists and the colonialists. The only colonialist or imperialist that I trust is a dead one." Mobutu had good reason to be concerned over the presence of troops from Guinea and Ghana, and he was certainly justified, in view of their activities, in requesting the UN to withdraw them. His appeal was duly considered. The next day, the United Nations specifically assigned soldiers from Guinea and Ghana to provide 24-hour protection for Lumumba. The same protection was extended wherever possible to Lumumba's followers as well. Conor O'Brien cautiously explained it this way. During this time, Hammarskjöld and Dial, his representative in Leopoldville, resisted Mobutu's demand that Lumumba, who had sought UN protection on September the 15th, should be handed over. On September the 18th, Lumumba left the Guinean embassy in a United Nations car and was taken to his well-guarded residence. He shouted from a balcony to the mob below, "I am not a prisoner, I am still master." He accused Mobutu of being a fascist and promised that he would soon bring back the communist embassies. That same day, a Lumumbist attempted to assassinate Mobutu, who miraculously was not hurt. When Vital Pakassa, the man who organized the attempted assassination, was found and arrested, he explained that the Soviets had offered him $10,000 for Mobutu's death. So that's interesting. Another synchronicity as well, an assassination that where the target was miraculously not hurt. Very interesting. A few weeks later, still under strong United Nations protection, Lumumba was escorted to a gala 200 guest dinner party given by the general from Guinea. By this time, most of Lumumba's close supporters were fleeing to neighbouring Stanleyville, where another communist dictator by the name of Antoine Gizenga ruled the roost. Finally, Lumumba decided to make a break for it to rejoin his comrades in Stanleyville. He slipped away from his UN guard and was promptly intercepted and arrested by Colonel Mobutu's forces and deported to Katanga. A few days later, he escaped from his captors. According to the story, he was seized by villagers and beaten to death. There is also the story that Lumumba was already dead before they put him on the plane and shipped him to Katanga, which is quite possible. There is the assertion that Lumumba's old enemy, Albert Kalonji, in Kasai province, had agreed to dispose of Lumumba, but changed his mind at the last minute. When the plane arrived, it found the runway covered with oil drums to prevent a landing. Running low on fuel, the plane proceeded to Katanga where no one expected it. Not too plausible. There is the UN theory that Tshombe personally plunged the death knife into Lumumba as he was dragged off the plane. Unlikely, to say the least. Regardless of which story appeals most to the imagination, certain facts should be kept in mind. The most important one is that practically everyone in the whole Congo hated Lumumba. When Colonel Mobutu and Kasavubu finally had him in their hands, they faced the rather sticky decision of what to do with him. They knew that the UN was doing everything possible to return Lumumba to power. They also knew Lumumba well enough to realize that if this should ever happen, they would both be arrested and executed. Obviously, the safest course of action for them was to kill Lumumba or to have someone else do it. Another fact to keep in mind is that when the UN sent a special team of investigators to the Congo to look into the circumstances surrounding Lumumba's death, it was denied entry, not by Katanga, but by the central government. Be that as it may, Lumumba's death triggered off worldwide reaction. The loss to the communists of one of their stooges was more than offset by the propaganda gain for communist objectives. The event was skillfully used to destroy what little pro-Katanga sentiment there was in America and elsewhere. Newspaper editors eulogized Lumumba and pointed the finger at Tshombe. A howling mob stormed the Belgian embassy in Moscow. In Singapore, the American embassy was picketed. Wild street demonstrations broke out in London, New Delhi, and Belgrade. In Cairo, the Belgian embassy was ransacked and gutted. Belgians had to flee their homes in Egypt. There was even a phony funeral in New York while black Muslims picketed the United Nations building. The murder of Lumumba was a savage act. It was followed by an equally savage one. In Stanleyville, 9 anti-Lumumbists who had been held and mistreated for months were also murdered. The United Nations conducted no investigations. There were no outcries of indignation or protest from UN spokesmen. There were no spontaneous demonstrations around the world. There were no bleeding heart editorials in our daily newspapers. Here is a silent tribute to the powerful hold that communist-inspired propaganda has over the minds and attitudes of those in the non-communist world. It is astounding that so many millions of people could be sincerely shocked and saddened over the death of a man like Patrice Lumumba, while at the same time feeling little concern over the brutal murders of hundreds of anti-communist leaders in the Congo, Eastern Europe, and Red China. Here was a man who was literally unknown to the world until he led his people into chaos. And then, in spite of his clear record as an ex-convict, a dope addict, a murderer, and a communist, he was catapulted into the hearts of millions who were skillfully conditioned to think of him as a great martyred leader. And that is the end of chapter 3. What a good one. I'm enjoying this very much. And we've made quite a dent in the book already, actually. I'm guessing there'll be about maybe 6 videos to get through this one. And there's quite a lot of pictures in here. But yeah, that is Patrice, what is he called? Patrice Lumumba. I'm just going to type that in quickly to Wikipedia and pull that up. Because that's quite, yeah, there he is, Patrice Lumumba. Congolese politician and independence leader. I just want to see if his legacy is still kind of whitewashed. Served as the first prime minister. He's the leader of the Congolese national movement. Ideologically an African nationalist. He played a significant role in the transformation of Congo from a colony of Belgium to an independent republic. So that sounds pretty positive. It says he was captured en route, tortured and executed by the separatist Katangan authorities of Moise Tshombe. He was seen as a martyr for the Pan-African movement. In 2002, Belgium formally apologized for its role in the execution. That's quite interesting as well. So if we have a look at Tshombe, secessionist state of Katanga for 3 years. Well, anyway, might be something to look into for preamble ramble on subsequent future videos, I think. I won't go into that rabbit hole right now. What do you think? How was that? Did people enjoy that chapter? Yeah, Adam, have you had a book that's printed like that before? It's difficult. It's frustrating because it's cut off at the edges. Off the top of my head, I can't think of any other books I have like this. I think it was probably just due to the fact that this was not published for the mainstream, and it's also been in a plastic bag since the 70s, and it had quite a damp smell. All these like documents and things that came with it, they have a kind of damp smell. So it might have just sort of, the pages at the bottom there where the glue is, I think that might have just sort of fused them together to make them harder to pull open. It's not too bad. Not all the pages are like that. In fact, most of them look pretty good and easy to read. I think it's just that start of the book, that bit we just went through. Flicking through it, the rest of it looks good. So we might be all right. We might have got through the difficult bit. Might have just been a bit of a cock up at the beginning there. But yeah, it's kind of frustrating and hard to read. Shamanarchist. Hello. I think I got your name right the first time there. How about that? Jam Hashwish over on Rumble says, reminds me of Operation Gladio. Yeah, I think you're on the money there. Absolutely makes me think of a similar thing. If you haven't heard of Operation Gladio. In fact, when I was looking for books that refer to the United Nations, I checked this one, Paul Williams' Operation Gladio, and it doesn't have a lot of references to the United Nations in the back of it. That's why I didn't mention it in the intro, which was surprising. I thought there would be more references to the UN, but I think it's kind of a different era, and it's more focused on the CIA. But yeah, Paul Williams, he's got a bunch of books out, actually. And the other thing it made me think of as well was NATO's Secret Army. Daniele Ganser, about the secret anti-communist stay-behind armies that were set up by the CIA and MI6 after the Second World War in all countries of Western Europe. Again, another bit of occulted history that's kind of left out, and you have to go digging up to find for yourself. So yeah, good recommendation there. Thanks for reminding me about that, Jam Hashwish. I appreciate it. All right, I think that's it for comments. So I think we'll wrap it up there. Yeah, excellent few chapters, I thought. Incredible. It's really it's a big contrast to the last couple of books we've read, because it's got a real strong narrative drive. Even Edward Griffin there, he's telling us there's characters, and he's giving us the names of the key players, and really, using emotive language not emotive language, but it's powerfully written, and he's communicating atrocities to us, and it's kind of heavy going, but at the same time, it's such critical information to be aware of, and kind of shocking given this organization, which is supposed to be about peace and security, ignoring opportunities to do that, and actually contributing to the opposite of peace and security, and actually protecting communists, or at least actors that are funded by communists who are just engaged in, you read that manifesto on that page that I tabbed is absolutely insane. I don't know if I've ever read anything like that, right? It would be very good to verify that whole not a manifesto, it was a directive, but it'd be very good to verify that directive. There is a footnote for it, and it's a UN document. So it'd be very good to verify that Lumumba's directive, where he's talking about bringing a system of flogging, stripping them in public and making them carry heavy things around in front of their wives and children, anyone who disagrees with him, letting people die in prison and then lying about how they've died. That's insane stuff. So if that's a real UN document, and they're still, I'll look closer at the Wikipedia page and find out if they're still touting this guy as some sort of hero, or some sort of maligned figure who was unjustly treated and remembered. It's just bonkers. Absolutely insane stuff. So I'm very glad we're reading this one. I'm enjoying it very much. A look ahead to the next chapter. Chapter 4 is the moderates. We've got, in part 1, I think, another 3 chapters. We've got another 3 chapters in part 1. The moderates, in the last resort, and part 6 says, peace. All continuing this story of Katanga. So we'll do that on the next video. Next video is going to be Thursday. I can't do Saturday this week, so we might only have 2 streams, Tuesday and Thursday. I might squeeze another one in. We'll see how it goes. As always, thank you for joining on live, and thank you for watching on the replay. allmylinks.com/Hayes Reviews if you want to find ways to support, or if you want to connect with me on social media, if you want to send some crypto, or if you want to, I think that's it. I think that's all that's on there. Or find out where I'm streaming: YouTube, Rumble, Odyssey. Join the channel, like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff, please. If you would be so kind as to do that, it really helps grow the channel and flesh things out. And the algorithm is dead set against me. I'm not going to be getting much organic traffic. I think word of mouth is the way to get this channel and this work out there. So if you know somebody who might be interested in history, maybe you know somebody who's a big proponent of the UN and sustainable development and the SDGs, you might send them this video, and you might say, there's another angle, there's another side to the UN which is not often talked about. Not many people know about it, but this guy's reading a book on it, and you might enjoy it. That would be very much appreciated as well. What else have I got to say? Oh, yeah, and mailing list. If you would like to stay in touch, just in case the channel ever gets nuked, drop me an email at autonomoususername@gmail.com. That's all one word. I know it's a stupid email address. I will get a better one at some point, but that's what it is for now. autonomoususername@gmail.com. If you shoot me an email, I'll add you to the mailing list, and that way we can stay in touch just in case the channels get nuked for whatever silly reason. It's happening all over the place. It has been happening for many years, and you never know when that kosh might come down and strike the channel. For that reason, consider subscribing and watching over on Rumble or Odyssey, because those places are much less likely to get nuked. Much, much, much less likely. And if you join the mailing list, I promise I will only use it to communicate with you news to do with the channel. I will also send you a free gift, which is a music bundle of original guitar recordings, all composed and recorded by yours truly. And there's a few little surprises in there as well. If you haven't got that yet, consider doing so. I would very much appreciate it. It's nothing too fancy. It's all recorded on my iPhone, so it's it's kind of rough recordings, but it's all authentic music from the heart, and you can't find it anywhere else. So it's unique to boot. And that's all I got to say. That is all the housekeeping done. So let's have a final little chat. Johnny says, hit that like button, people. Thank you for that, Johnny. Yeah, I always forget to mention that. Frank says, thanks, Nick. You're very welcome. LJ, thank you very much. You are also very welcome. All right, let's wrap it up there. We'll be back on Thursday, 7 p.m., continuing our epic reading of this book, and what a book it is, The Fearful Master, Second Look at the United Nations by G. Edward Griffin. See you all on Thursday, I hope. Until then, take care of yourselves, take care of each other. Enjoy the warmth and the sunshine. Stay away from all the morons who are doing moronic things, Focus more on your communities, your street, your neighbors. Maybe there is an elderly relative you haven't checked in on for a while, or somebody who needs a hand. Think local and try and switch off from the constant drip of doom and gloom that we get in our media and social media feeds. A lot of the time, it's not good to be too focused on that stuff, So take a break every once in a while. And I'll see you on Thursday. And until then, yeah, I think I already said it. The only thing left to say now is God bless.